please be seated.
Committee of the Whole.
Honorable members, I'd like to call Committee of the Whole to order. Committee of the Whole has under consideration Bill 15, the Choice in Education Act 2020. We are on Amendment A7. Are there any members wishing to speak to the amendment? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, everyone. And welcome to Democracy in Action. There's going to be lots of action this evening, and I hope that everyone can keep the track of what's to come. First up, with the final amendments for Bill 15, I think that I think that we all know that we indeed do have choice in education, and have had so for quite a long time. I was just thinking back around the last 4 years, for example, and I know in regards to charter schools, for example, I don't think we had a new charter application come forward over the last 4 years. And so while the charters are definitely functioning and doing a good job and educating kids and so forth, it's not as though there were people beating down the doors to put in new applications for charter schools as such. Now, that could change over time, and it's within the realm of possibility to do so. But I mean, it's important for us to look at the evidence as it stands, to not make presumptions around those things. We know that there's charter schools that are growing, and we did make some provision for that. And there's charter schools that provide very specialized education, and we always want to make provision for that too. So again, I know that the rhetoric gets hot and it's all about politics and so forth, but I mean, let's not deny the facts that we indeed do have some of the greatest diversity of choice between different types of education here in the province of Alberta of any jurisdiction in Canada. We have public schools, we have Catholic schools, which are public as well. We have charter schools, we have Francophone school boards, which are growing exponentially, I must say. Just a free advice from the opposition to the government. Make sure you look after the exponential growth that we see and will see in Francophone education over these next few years. We have private schools, of course, and we have homeschooling. And so all of those, I believe, are not just functioning, but thriving here in the province of Alberta. They have done so, and they will continue to do so too. And so with our humble amendments, we have a couple more here to perhaps hone the raw material that we've been given here with this Choice in Education Amendment Act. I hope that everyone is feeling in a cooperative mood, and they might consider these amendments that we have here this evening, starting with the one that's on the floor tonight. Thank you.
Wishing to speak to Amendment A7? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A7 as moved by. On Amendment A7 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. The amendment appears to be defeated. We're back on the main bill, Bill 15. Any speakers wishing to speak to the bill? The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to rise and to speak to Bill 15. Actually, I have an amendment, so I will use the original. Sorry, I'm just going to make sure I have one.
Remember, this will be known as Amendment A8. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would actually like to read this amendment. So the intent of this amendment is to strike out Section 8 and substitute the following. Section 25 is amended as follows. A, subsection 1 is amended by striking out the minister may issue a charter and substituting subject to subsection 4, the minister may issue a charter. B, by repealing subsection 1A and substituting the following. A, focuses on a learning style, a teaching style, approach or philosophy or pedagogy that is not already being offered by a board of a public or separate school division or francophone regional authority operating within the geographic area in which the charter school will be located, or 2, a vocation-based education. C, by striking out subsection 2B and substituting the following. B, subject to subsection 4, renew the term of a charter, or D, by adding the following immediately after subsection 3, the minister shall not issue or renew a charter under this section unless the charter contains a term requiring the charter school to implement a policy of non-discrimination with respect to the enrollment of students with physical or mental disabilities. B, by striking out section 10 and substituting the following. Following is added before section 29, recognition of private schools. 28.1, private schools are recognized as being important in providing parents and students with choice in education, and a person responsible for the operation of a private school shall ensure A, students enrolled in the private school are provided with an education program consistent with the requirements set out in the Act and the regulations, and B, the private school implements a policy of non-discrimination with respect to the enrollment of students with physical or mental disabilities. Finally, 2, a private school must not be registered or accredited by the minister as a private school unless it implements a policy referred to in subsection 1B. So I think that it's pretty self-explanatory that there are a number of great private and charter schools already in Alberta, but it has been the experience of some families and guardians of children or students with disabilities that have not been able to access participation in charter schools like other students without disabilities. And so I think this simple amendment actually says to everybody that votes for this amendment, that says absolutely every student in the province of Alberta shall have equal access to education, whatever they decide that education should look like. So you want to talk about choice? Let's give equal choice to every single student in Alberta. That means students with disabilities as well, because based on experience, that has not been the experience of everybody, and so that's why this amendment is necessary. I would also like to remind the members of this House that one of the agency's boards and commissions, and I'm sure there's a member here tonight, I think just one, that sits on the Premier's Council on Status of People with Disabilities. As you know, the role of this particular group is to provide advice to the Premier through various ministers using that lens of looking at whatever policies, whether it's tourism, whether it's education, whatever it is, that they're using the lens of disability to ensure that as much as possible do as much as possible to remove barriers so that inclusion is a reality. And I think that we probably, all of us, know some children or students that have whatever disability, and life is not always easy. And so it is important for us to do what the Premier's Council on the Status of Persons with Disabilities is tasked with doing, is looking at everything with that lens. And the guiding principle that they use is the United Nations Charter on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So I think that particular declaration, which is old now, sadly it's from the 1970s, it's great when it happened. It seems like we still have a lot of work to do. But the goal of this declaration is really to address obstacles that are created by social institutions and society, whether or not they're done deliberately, particularly in education. So it certainly focuses in education, because we all know, we've heard every member probably just about stand up in this place and talk about the importance of education. Now, we've heard some people talk more about the importance of choice in education, which I would agree in this case, choice needs to be applied equally to every single person. That means people with disabilities. And I don't believe that Bill 15, as it is right now, today, is clear and provides unequivocal direction to every future private, charter, whatever school that whatever they decide to do or however they decide to deliver their supports, that they do so in keeping with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And that means acknowledging that there are systemic barriers and doing everything they can to remove them. So I think, we've proposed a number of amendments to the bill. I've said this before. I think it is wrong for any government to believe that they get everything right all the time. I think it's natural for people to forget things or make mistakes. And so I would suggest that this particular amendment is very important if you are trying to send a message to all Albertans that you acknowledge there are systemic barriers, particularly in education, that you acknowledge that even if you feel it's already in place in your current bill, that you are taking another step to say this is so important that we're going to go over and above that, approve this amendment and say, absolutely, we commit to doing everything we can to remove barriers for people with disabilities. That's about it. That's all I have. And so I would really like to encourage everyone to maybe put down your partisan hat for a second and think about what's at stake. It might just be a few children that are affected by this, that at some point decide they want to go to a school that is created for whatever reason, let's say charter school, and they're not able to do that because for whatever reason they're not accepted, because there are no current protections. So I would encourage every member to do the right thing and vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Just for the benefit of all members, this is a 2-page amendment. There should be a staple in it, but if not, you're looking for 2 pages. Any other members wishing to speak to Amendment A8? Seeing none, I will ask the question on Amendment A8 as moved by the Honourable Member for St. Alberta. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. The amendment has been defeated. A division has been called. Ring the bells. question has been called on Amendment A8 to Bill 15. All those in favor of the amendment, please stand.
Mr. Billis, Mr. Dang, Mr. Egan, Mr. Fian, Ms. Renault, Member Carson.
All those opposed to the amended, please stand.
The Honourable Mr. Copping, the Honourable Mr. Panda, the Honourable Minister LaGrange, the Honourable Mr. Glubish, the Honourable Mr. Nicolaides, the Honourable Ms. Pond, Mr. Ellis, Ms. Goodridge, Ms. Armstrong-Humanock, Mr. Horner, Mr. Lowen, Mr. Williams, the Honourable Mrs. Sawney, Mrs. Allard, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Tour, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Getson, Mr. Smith, Mr. Singh.
Madam Chair, total for the amendment 6, total against 21.
Members, that amendment has been defeated. We are now back on the main bill, Bill 15. Any other members wishing to speak? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to address this Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020. A little disappointed that we're not going to be supporting the United Nations Declaration regarding the rights of disabled persons, but perhaps we'll have a bit more luck with the Alberta Human Rights Act, given that it was actually introduced into this House by a Conservative government, so I can't imagine why they would be opposed to it now at this particular time. But I do have an amendment.
Known as Amendment A9. Honourable Member, please proceed.
Thank you. You'd like me to read the full amendment? Okay. The amendment to Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020. The amendment reads, Member Hoffman to move that Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020, be amended in Section 5 in the proposed Section 20A by striking out subsection 1 and substituting the following. Home education programs, 20 brackets 1. A parent of a student may provide, at home or elsewhere, a type of home education program for the student if the program meets A, supervision requirements, including a requirement to comply with measures to ensure non-discrimination in the provision of the program in accordance with the Alberta Human Rights Act, and B, any other requirements set out in the regulations. In Section B, in subsection 2, 1, by striking out, the minister shall make regulations and substituting subject to the requirements in subsection 1, brackets A, the minister may make regulations. And 2, in clause B, by striking out, quotes, if any. That's the end. So this amendment is fairly straightforward. We know that there has been a long practice of having homeschooling in the province of Alberta. I know many people who have taken advantage of that opportunity, as is their right, and have provided excellent schooling opportunities for students, and in fact have had their children go on to do extremely well in post-secondary and participating in the province of Alberta. So we know that homeschooling is a very legitimate, effective way of schooling your children if you choose to do that. I, as an MLA, have had an opportunity on more than one occasion to have parents bring their children in who are their homeschooling for a sit down with the MLA just to have a conversation about what it is that MLAs do. So I know that they're really reaching out and doing some excellent work. The thing that I'm concerned about is that Bill 15 seems to make a change under Section 5 regarding the supervision of what happens in homeschooling. It's normal that when a parent decides to homeschool rather than to send their child to a local school, that they would be expected to provide an education that would be equal to and comparable to the education that would be received in a school that's supervised by a school board. And just as all the teachers in the school board are responsible to provide an appropriate curriculum as authorized by the province of Alberta in the school system, so parents schooling at home would be provided supervision by either a public school or a separate school board or a francophone school board, or an accredited funded private school who had the ability to conduct at least 2 evaluations of that student throughout the year. And that has been removed from the Act. And so we would like to put that back in, that while homeschooling is a viable option, it should still be responsible and transparent to the education system in the province of Alberta and have appropriate kinds of supervision as every other school does in the province of Alberta. So we want the government to make clear what the changes that they have instituted will mean to the access to quality, equal education across the province, and this will certainly allow us to spend a bit of time with the parents of homeschooled children to ensure that the education that they're receiving is appropriate and falls in line with the recommendations of the school systems and the provinces of Alberta's curriculum. Now, as well, we specifically identify the need to ensure that the curriculum that is provided is one which reflects the values of the province of Alberta, particularly with regard to non-discrimination. And so as such, we have indicated that we would like to see the government reflect that the education provided to students in the school should be consistent with the Alberta Human Rights Act. And as I just mentioned briefly before, I would think that this would be perfectly acceptable to the Conservative government, given that the Alberta Human Rights Act was, in fact, brought in by a Conservative government to reflect the greater values of the province of Alberta. And so at this time, I think it's very important that we take some time to ensure that homeschooling continues to be a good and effective option in the province of Alberta, that it is consistent with education that is received elsewhere in the province of Alberta, and that education reflects the greater values of the province of Alberta as exemplified by the Alberta Human Rights Act. Thank you.
Any members wishing to speak to Amendment A9? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A9 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford on behalf of the Member for Edmonton Glenora. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. The amendment appears to be defeated. We are back on the main bill. Any speakers wishing to speak to Bill 15? The Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you very much, and to the Minister of Education for bringing this forward. Thank you so much for the efforts on this. One of the things that we heard at the doors in my area, in the cafes and everywhere else we're at, was the choice, the actual choice that parents needed in education. It isn't necessarily that the public system is bad by any means, because there's lots of parents out there that love their public systems, that love their schools. But the fact that some of the nuances that were in place that kind of stifled some of the selection and some of the choice in the schools, that was a bit problematic. And when the last administration had made some other subtleties and changes that seemed to be getting in between the choice of parents, how they interfaced with the students, and how they could then interface with the teachers, that we managed to also change last session or the session before, that really resonated with folks. It's almost like they were starting to get back their freedoms, their choices, and those things to do that. Some of the things that were dispelling myths out there, when I first got into this and started going around, I didn't think if you had a public or a charter school or homeschooling that you could potentially go to university as some of the students. So that was dispelled. I had this bias again because I went through the public system, as did my wife, and we were educated in that manner. But hearing some of these things that were taking place, well, that's off the table. So if you have a homeschool or a charter school, a public school, you have the same opportunity to access the higher education, higher learning, etc. The other thing that was interesting is looking at some of the alternative models, Madam Speaker, was the Alberta's Teachers Union wasn't involved. So it was interesting to see some of those models out there that were outside of the traditional bubble. It didn't involve the same traditional unions or the way that the public schools were set up and managed. And what I'd seen there was something that what I was more accustomed to was that when the principal or the manager of an organization could actually critique, do performance evaluations, and manage their staff a lot better. What we'd also seen in some of these, and it was a bit of an eye-opener to me as well, was the performance and the test scores, and also access to individuals that were teaching programs that were actually masters in their craft or in their trade. So that was really interesting to see as well, and the flexibility and diversity out there. And some of the homeschoolers, they were concerned as well. It was to do with flexibility, the way that it worked for their family, their lifestyles. Those were some of the choices that they needed. So again, with potentially the lower numbers that we were seeing, it could be argued that also, again, some of the rules and nuances in place were also kind of stifling that. Now, when COVID took place, I think a bunch of us as parents that have kids at home got our eyes open towards what was taking place in some of the public school systems. The delivery method, what was being taught, and the performances. And it was interesting to see that most of these performances across the board have actually gone up for the students that are participating in those programs. The ones that were in private or the charter systems didn't really skip a beat. They were up and running within 2 or 3 days for the most part in my area, and they carried on, and their remarks were reflective of that. So when we're talking about some of the issues, the members opposite are bringing up articles and items from United Nations and other acts and this act and that act, and almost putting in this fictitious barrier of saying that it's only the private schools or it's potentially only homeschooling that would have these issues. And I can only point, because I have 4 children in that system, some of the teaching methodologies that we became aware of. There was one grade 4 teacher that had my daughter Faith in tears coming home from school because she was setting the kids up for failure. Now, it wasn't until my daughter came back and said, "That's it, I give up, I don't want to go to school anymore." And this really broke my heart because this little girl worked in this PowerPoint presentation and did this with her little friend. But her teacher didn't really give her good guidance on it. So when this girl goes up the first time and her teacher rips on her in front of the class and sits her down, my wife then intervened to ask what was going on. Well, lo and behold, this one teacher had her own teaching methodology. And this methodology that she looked at was this theory, because she claimed to be a psychologist as well, was that kids need to fail to succeed. So what this teacher was doing was literally harming the children's self-esteem to make them stronger people. She brought forward this fictitious garbage document that even the principal of the school wasn't aware of. So once my wife got involved and looked at that teaching method was then gone. But this individual, this teacher, was still within there. So these things do happen. And when my daughter Cora went to go for that same teacher, was teaching her French class, it was the same type of tactics. These things happen in our public schools as well. So when we're talking about these bubbles and insular against the parents, the ones that actually love and care for these children, I would hardly imagine that the numbers are higher than what these kids are exposed to in the public system of any potential forms or issues like that. The members opposite had also mentioned about the kindergarten to grade 12, where they were concerned that there was vocation learning potentially would be taking place in this potential new system. So almost as if there's this academic snobbery that if you learn with your hands or if you have a different methodology of learning, then that's a bad thing. You shouldn't be exposed to anything that's a type of vocation until grade 7. Well, anybody who's grown up with their parents that actually spend time with them, either working in the garage or in the shop or on the farm or anything else, you're actually being exposed to this all the way along. So the fact that there's some harm or some potential of, a parent actually being an electrician and the child might become an electrician one day or being exposed to it, I think there's also some positioning there that needs to be corrected. And again, I'm a member of the Skilled Trades Caucus. I'm the vice chair of that, and I'm also sitting on the Skilled Trades Task Force. And one of the biggest things that we're working on is the parity of esteem. And that's to make sure that folks understand that different alternate deliveries of method and teaching should be looked at along the same ways, that it's not a bad thing to be able to get a trade or to go along those lines. And some of the falsehoods that are out there is if you're stuck in one particular form of learning, well, then you're stuck. So if you're going to become a tradesperson, that's all you're going to ever be when you grow up, and you'll never advance any further. But when you actually start looking at the holistic model and you look at different jurisdictions, if I looked over in Europe, and I'm not sure if anyone's heard of this place called Germany, they tend to have some pretty good engineers over there and some pretty good craftspeople. Well, they're kind of world renowned for that. The Swiss are as well, and you look at some of the European models. the fundamental difference there is that everyone is exposed to a vocation one way, shape, form, or another in this type of learning. So it doesn't have to be just skilled trades with your hand. If you're taking engineering there, you actually have to be exposed to a craft or a trade for 1 year to actually get your degree and your certificate. It's a different way of doing it, and that's why we're focusing in on these items. When you have a well-rounded education, exposure to all these different things, we actually have better people. So when we're building projects and you have project teams, you don't want the same type of people coming in all the time. To have a major project, and I can see one of my colleagues nodding across the aisle, he understands that you need that diversity. You need folks from different parts of the world. You need different vocations within those areas, the accountants, the lawyers, the tradespeople, et cetera. And that's what you need to build a project team. So why would we limit in Alberta, when we want our competitive advantage to be so high, to only have one methodology of teaching or only one type of curriculum out there? Why wouldn't we want that diversity and that choice to fit in those areas, Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair? When we look at these different ladders of learning, I can accredit a lot of my learning was actually once I got out of school, once you actually start applying these. And we had this thing, basically, it was transferable skill sets. You might learn one craft or one method of learning, and then you apply it to a different model and you expose yourself to it. And that's the only way that we can really get there. So if I was looking at these ladders of learning, there would be a trade, maybe an engineering faculty, and maybe something on the business side that would actually get you to running a company. And that's the type of things that having these choices out there will actually afford people to allow. So I don't want to chew up too much more time on this. I think, Minister of Education, thank you so much. And again, because of these choices and because of what's taking place, I'm going to have my son going back to high school next year. He's going to stay within that stream. My 3 daughters are going to sidestep what was taking place within that jurisdiction. My wife is then taking Alberta distance learning curriculum to be able to apply it to them. She supplemented and augmented that with all the other type of items that were out there now because of COVID and the availability of this access to information. And this is a wonderful experience for our family to do that. We anticipate that our girls will pop back into the high school curriculum at that point, once they're at the high school level. But honestly, with everything that's taking place in the moving parts, my kids, my daughters, are the ones that ask my wife to be able to be taught at home after seeing the difference of what they were doing within the public system to there. So we were talking about children having choices. My little girls are strong, independent young ladies, and you can't really peg them in a corner and tell them what to do. We've treated them with that kind, loving thing, and we've grown up with wanting kids to become young adults that have that form of critical thinking, and that's the only way that we can do this. So thank you so much for those choices, and with that, I'll turn it over to the next person who wants to talk. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak to Bill 15? The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to rise to speak to Bill 15, just following the member. I didn't catch all of what he said, but he talked a lot about his family's experience, and that's great. I'm thrilled that there are families all over the province that have had different positive experiences with different ways of learning, different choices in education. He did mention something about Alberta distance learning that somebody would be participating in, but I think that they got their funding cut. So I think it's going to be cut over the next 2 years by the UCP, so you might want to look into that. Anyway, I just wanted to sum up some of the things. And just for clarity, I think that we hear a lot of things in this place, but I think for clarity, in no way do we think that learning a vocation in education is a bad thing. Not at all. Different kinds of schooling for different people, that's what choice is about. And I think that's why Alberta has done such a phenomenal job with choice. But let's just be clear about some of the amendments that were summarily dismissed in this place. So one of the first ones that happened was tethering charter schools to school boards. Now I know that some of the members have had some negative things to say about school boards, and like any sort of elected body, they're certainly not perfect. Not every school board is perfect, not every decision is perfect, but for the most part, they are a democratically elected body, and I think that we need to respect that. Certainly hold them to account, but we need to respect that. So that in itself, I don't think is necessarily a bad move. The UCP members chose to get rid of this, or not to vote for this. Another one was the title change that I thought was particularly important, and I think I started to speak to that yesterday. And the title is Choice in Education, but I think that there is a great deal of choice in education already in Alberta, and I think to To suggest that there isn't, and to suggest that this particular piece of legislation is going to introduce choice is really, I don't think it's very straightforward and very transparent for a lot of reasons. And I'm going to reiterate something that I said yesterday. So the government of Alberta has a long history of supporting school choice. Let's look back at some of the different bills. Bill 19, School Amendment Act, which first introduced charter schools, as well as several additional policy changes that we've seen to alter Alberta's education system on an unprecedented scale. However, the government's positive stance on school choice began even earlier than that, even earlier than the 1990s. Alberta has been argued to have an extremely accommodating stance towards school choice, as evidenced by the development of alternative school funding in the 70s, acceptance of private schools, and the Revised School Act of 1988. Alberta has been described as offering the greatest degree of school choice in Canada. School choice is embedded in the fabric of the education system in Alberta, and there is simply no existential threat to school choice in Alberta. So to see a piece of legislation talk about school choice is really misleading, in my opinion, Madam Chair. I think that to fail to recognize the incredible diversity and choice, and I think we heard one member just recently stand up and talk about the different opportunities that family members have been fortunate to have, which is great, I think underlines the point that there is a great deal of choice. One of the things I can tell you about St. Albert in particular, has a great deal of choice, and after speaking with school boards, what I do know is that when they are approached with ideas, let's say it's from a group of people that are seeing a particular need for a group of students, that they do everything in their power within their ability to address that need within that system. And I think that is true for a lot of school boards. So that was unfortunate to see the members summarily dismiss the amendment to change the title to better reflect reality. And let's not forget that approximately 94% of students rely on and appreciate the high quality of public education in this province. And I know I've heard a number of members say that we understand 94% of Alberta students do this, but, and you know the whole problem with but. The point is 94% of students in this province choose public education. That is why the investment is so important, and that is why I believe they have been so responsive to requests to address different choice. So it was very sad to see that amendment just tossed. I think the next two amendments, and this isn't really in order, this isn't the order that they went. The first one of the amendments was made, I think, for the member for, I can't remember. Oh, Whitemud, member for Whitemud, that's right. And she, her amendment, I believe, looked at introducing Articles 28 and 29 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child to the preamble. We've certainly chatted a lot about the importance of preamble. It isn't certainly the technicalities of a piece of legislation, but it really sets the tone. So it sets the tone, or the, I guess, a bit of a value statement, if you will, about what the legislation is about. So we're not saying that you must do these things, but we're saying the tone of this is really to adhere to this declaration, in particular these articles, as they relate to the child. I don't know if members have had a stroll through the various articles and to have a look at what they stand for, what they mean. They're incredible. I have no idea why the UCP government has an issue with including those articles in the preamble. Doesn't make sense. If this is about choice, if this is truly about making education better in Alberta, why not include something that focuses on the child? But yes, that was another amendment that was summarily dismissed. Another one that we just saw sort of go through very quickly tonight was about adding some protection for students with disabilities. Again, really looking at a position that is the United Nations position on relating to people with disabilities, and it really is about recognizing the systemic barriers. We've heard a lot in the last few weeks talking about systemic racism, and I think for those of us that have sort of grown up with a lot of privilege, it's been really an eye-opening time to hear stories or to hear from people to talk about what that looks like for them, because I think these are things that I personally have not experienced in my life I certainly have a lot of privilege, but for people with disabilities, we can't even begin to understand the barriers that are presented to them because that's not our reality. I hope one day there are more people with disabilities represented in this place, and then we won't have to rely on people that actually talk to other people with disabilities that have ideas, but that they will present them themselves. Yeah. But I think that what we are trying to do here is to say, walk the walk. If you say that you believe that people with disabilities have the same rights as everybody else, prove it. Prove it. So what we're telling you is that not every person, not every child with a disability has had success being admitted or being accepted into a charter school in this province. So that's something that a piece of legislation can correct. That was missed in the original piece of legislation, Bill 15. This amendment would have closed that hole. The UCP chose to say no. Some of the other issues, obviously, we can talk a little bit about the consultation process. You know, we could spend a lot of time talking about the issues that the UCP have had with consultation. You know, let's be honest, consultation after the fact, after you change something, isn't really consultation. That's really just checking a box or looking for affirmation. Real consultation means talking to everybody, even people that don't agree with you. Actually, that's the tough part, but that's important. And so this was another failure. You know, in terms of process, the ministry chose to exclude 2,357 surveys said to be associated with a group called Support for Our Students, a public advocacy group. It doesn't matter where they come from. These were individual responses to a survey. You asked Albertans, you as in government, asked Albertans to respond to questions, to provide insight and feedback. Doesn't mean you have to like it, but you don't get to summarily dismiss it because you've decided it's with a group that you don't particularly side with or like. So that leads me to believe that whatever consultation results you have, you're not getting the full picture. You know, I would also argue that there are some consequences to this particular piece of legislation. So the consequences of the Choice in Education Act. And the concern that policy and the regulatory implementation may in fact lead to the splintering of strong public education. And I think that, you know, that is not an opinion that I have. That's not something that I'm making up here today, but these are genuine concerns of people that are really invested in public education. And so I think we all know, particularly those of us that sit in this House, understand that there's not an unlimited amount of money to invest in things, right? We have important things to get done. We have health care, we have infrastructure, we have so many things to invest in. There is not an unlimited supply. And I think for us to recognize how important public education is really important. And the fact that this piece of legislation talks about choice, creating new choice, when we already have so much choice that exists. So instead of lifting these up or making them better if it's possible, to further stretch the dollars, the limited dollars that we have for our children, for education, we're going to create other ways to divert funding. So that is a very real concern of some Albertans. And so I know, listen, I kids that went through school, it's been a while now, but I've had kids that have gone through school, and certainly not every place, not every grade, not every teacher, not every subject was perfect. But what I do know, that at the end of the day, the public education and the people, the educators that were there, really helped my children form a foundation for their adult lives, and I'm forever grateful. It wasn't always perfect. It could have been better sometimes, but on the whole, they learned things that will serve them well the rest of their lives, and I think the vast majority of Albertans that have gone through the public system feel that way. Clearly, when 94% of Alberta students are in public education, that says a lot. So are we really creating choice in education for all Albertans, or are we creating choice for some Albertans and not looking at the large picture? So I think those are important things to think about. I also think that it's very telling that, I know one of the members earlier this afternoon, I would have to read Hansard to see the exact comments, but one of the comments, it was along the lines of that we had proposed a lot of amendments And it seemed to be sort of political and, don't really understand why you're doing that. And I'm paraphrasing, that is certainly not, those are not the words that were used. But I think if you believe that we actually are doing these amendments or figuring out what we think could make a piece of legislation that we already believe is flawed, if you believe that we do this for politics or for fun or to make life more uncomfortable, you are sadly mistaken. And so I think that there were so many concerns in particular for this piece of legislation that it took a lot of time for us to figure out, what were the most important ones to bring forward, because there were so many. Because we had talked to so many people and there were so many concerns. So I think that for members of this chamber to understand, certainly I get that we're opposition. I get that it's our role to perhaps point out flaws or oppose some things. Sometimes it's support some things. But it's our job to look at legislation as it's presented and to try to make it better. And, I believe that having a preamble, at the very least, that talks about the importance and the rights of the child are vital. UCP said no to that. Protecting the rights and access of people with disabilities is vital. It shouldn't be an extra. It's vital, and you missed it. But again, when given the opportunity to vote on an amendment to fix that, UCP said no. And that's unfortunate, because you didn't get it all right the first time. You absolutely did not. And it's incredibly disappointing. And on that, I'm going to take my seat. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
I just need to respond to the misinformation I've been hearing over the last little while here. And I guess there is one thing I guess we can agree on, that preambles are important. And when you talk about the rights of the child, there is nothing but the rights of the child listed in our preamble. Let me read here. Whereas the Government of Alberta recognizes the importance of an inclusive education system that provides each student with the relevant learning opportunities and supports necessary to achieve success. Whereas parents have the right and the responsibility to make informed decisions. Whereas the educational best interest of the child is the paramount consideration in making decisions about a child's education. Whereas education is shared responsibility. Whereas students are entitled to welcoming, caring, respectful, safe learning environments that respect diversity and nurture the sense of belonging and a positive sense of self. Where the role of education is to develop engaged thinkers who think critically and creatively, and ethical citizens who demonstrate respect, teamwork, democratic ideals, and who work with an entrepreneurial spirit to face challenge with resiliency, adaptability, risk-taking, and bold decision-making. And I can go on and on and on. The Education Act is all about the child, and I have to also correct that no one on this side has ever said that we don't have an excellent public education system. We absolutely do have an excellent public education system, but it's also excellent because beyond the public, francophone, and separate school system, we also have the availability of charter schools and independent schools and homeschoolings and ECS. So it was never in dispute. We have excellent school boards. I was a trustee for 11 and a half years. I didn't spend 11 and a half years as a public school trustee because I didn't value public education. All my children went through public education. So that has never been in dispute, ever. We believe that this bill is an excellent bill because of the fact that it first and foremost recognizes that it's the right of the parent to choose the type of education they want and to value the education that we have here in Alberta, which is excellent but has many pathways to address the various needs of the students. So I'm just going to leave it at that. There was so much misinformation. I could go on for hours and hours and hours, and I don't want to take up your time, but we just need to clarify what you just heard is totally false. What we have, and I could speak to every single amendment that was put forward, there is so much misinformation there, and we need to dispute that. And I want you all to support Bill 15. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Madam Speaker,
I apologize if I get passionate about this speech, but the topic of educational choice hits close to home. We need an educational choice in this province to keep school boards accountable. Competition makes them provide the best possible product to our children. Choice is an Alberta advantage. Many schools, jurisdictions across the country don't have choice, and I'm proud to live in a province that has many educational opportunities to choose from as it better educates our children. Back several years ago, a friend of mine sent their children to school. However, the school was the wrong choice. For starters, in grade 5, my friend's children were asked to be tested for a learning disability by the school. It was funny because the children's parents thought the school was crazy. Well, what they didn't do, what any logical parent would do, was they got their own test, a second opinion. So one Saturday morning, they hop in their car, they go take their child to the Sylvan Learning Centre. Sylvan came back to tell my friend that their child was reading at an extremely high level for their age. I laugh because we go from a learning disability to an extremely high level, and I'm just wondering how the school can get something like that wrong. On top of all this, both of my friend's children started to get bullied. Madam Speaker, let me say bullying is wrong. This is one of the reasons I fight so hard against children being bullied. This behavior is not right, and to make matters worse, the school system did nothing. This behavior continued for a long time, till my friends had enough. They approached the principal about doing something about this behavior, but to no avail. Again, Madam Speaker, the principal turned a blind eye and told them that they were not able to transfer schools. The principal also said he had bigger fish to fry. Shame. Thank goodness my friend spoke to a supportive teacher from another school, which started the often uncharted process for my friend's child to get transferred to another school. The supportive teacher was flabbergasted that an education system would tell parents that they were locked into a school system. Upon transferring my friend's children, they found that bullying magically stopped and even their marks went up. Actually, in grade 12, one of them got honors in English, which is surprising because it was the same child who was sent to the Sylvan Learning Centre. The reason I'm telling the House this story is if it weren't for choice, I don't know how those children would have continued under the constant stress of bullying. But Madam Speaker, children aren't the only ones bullying. They learn it from the educational leadership. We cannot allow school boards to bully others into not allowing choice in this province. This happened back in 2015 when public school boards tried to build a $1.2 million war chest to fight separate schools. Madam Speaker, it was shameful. The Public School Board Association of Alberta tried to create a 90-cent a student levy on its members to fight choice. Not only was this a gross misuse of taxpayers' money, separate education is a constitutional right that many enjoy, including me. Actually, it's a human right, period. Section 26(3) of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. Alberta's choice-based school system is recognized as a world leader in providing high-quality education. Choice in our province creates competition. It forces boards across Alberta to provide the best possible educational opportunities that gives our children the best outcomes of being successful in the future. Continuing on the topic of bullying, you know what's shameful, Madam Speaker? We have adults bullying educational choice. Several weeks ago, NDP Best Buddy and AFL Board President Gil McGowan bullied other factions of educational choice, specifically chartered school and homeschooling. Because contrary to what they may believe, Albertans do have religious rights. And no, Madam Speaker, the fact that some schools add religious education to their students' experience does not, as Gil McGowan suggested, make these schools, quote, a nut bar religious charter school. These are hurtful and shameful comments and still need to be walked back, as over 80,000 parents choose to send their kids to these schools. Do you know Muslim, Christian, and other religious individuals have asked for school choice? Do you know our government respects all individuals, no matter what they believe? The AFL is supposed to represent many unions across Alberta. It is, after all, called the Alberta Federation of Labour. These hardworking parents Mr. McGowan is using hurtful language towards are teachers at many of these institutions. So does the AFL really best represent unions across our province? No. Many of the parents who send their children to the schools, other than the public one, work in union organizations and had to hear these comments in the public sphere. Again, it shows Mr. McGowan and the NDP and the AFL are out of touch with Albertans. Do you want to know why the world is so polarized? It's because people are intolerant of those who have religious beliefs. So those who believe in honesty, integrity, and kindness, those who believe in family, community, and helping their neighbors out in tough challenges are the ones the NDP believe are religious nut bars. They are the same people they should learn from, not speak down to. This is why Bill 15 will protect Alberta's long history of educational choice, including public and separate schools, francophone schools, charter schools, independent schools, early childhood education, and home education. Madam Speaker, thank you for allowing me to stand up in support of School Choice Bill 15.
Of Service Alberta.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm pleased to rise today in support of Bill 15, the Choice in Education Act. Madam Chair, if we walk back to March and April of last year during the election campaign, I heard time and time again from families who said, Nate, you need to stand up for choice in education. We feel that our rights and our ability to choose the education that's best for our children are under attack by the current government. And we want you to go and be our voice at the legislature to stand up for our rights. Well, Madam Chair, I am so fortunate to be here and to be in this chair now, able to speak in favor of the bill put forward by my friend and colleague, the Minister of Education, to do just that. To make it very clear to everyone across this province that our government is committed to protecting choice in education. We are committed to the belief that parents and not politicians have the right to choose the kind of education that they feel is best for their children. That we respect parents' rights, and that we were not okay with the fact that those rights were being overtaken by the previous government's political agendas. The bill that we are discussing today, Bill 15, creates more options for parents to deliver home education for their children, to allow for the creation of charter schools to specifically focus on trades and skills development. This protects ultimately Alberta's long history of education choice, including public and separate schools, including francophone schools and charter schools and independent schools, as well as early childhood education and home education. This is something I believe very firmly in, Madam Chair. This is something very important to me personally, and it is a big reason why I left my career as a venture capital investor to run for office, because I wanted to be a voice for those families in Strathcona Assured Park that share that value of choice in education. So with that said, Madam Chair, I want to just take a couple of minutes. I know we don't have a lot of time tonight, but I just want to talk a little bit about some of the amazing options in Strathcona County and Assured Park that families from those communities have to choose from. On the public side, we've got some amazing schools like our Joshua Junior and Senior High. They offer an amazing French immersion program. I relate with that, Madam Chair, because I graduated from a public school with a French immersion program. I did K-12 in French immersion, and I really believe that shaped who I am. It built my character, it built my work ethic, and I really value having a second language. There's also Strathcona Christian Academy, which may have started out as a private school over 30 years ago, but then in 1998 they became a part of Elk Island Public Schools and then offered their Christian programming as an alternative program under the public school framework. This is a school that has an excellent academic track record, an excellent sports track record, an excellent arts track record. All around, it's an outstanding school. And I know a thing or two about that school because my wife actually teaches there, although she's on maternity leave this year. But she's looking forward to going back, Madam Chair, this fall. On the Catholic side, we've got some outstanding schools in Strathcona County. We have on the elementary side, we have St. Luke's Catholic School in Cooking Lake. I had a chance to visit them recently, Madam Chair, and I learned all about their participation in the Apple Schools program, which is an amazing program to help integrate more healthy lifestyle decisions making for their kids. And that is going to have lasting effects on those children's lives and the lives of their families. Then at the high school level, there's Archbishop Jordan Catholic High School. This is an outstanding school as well. And they have a world-class robotics program where they're sending not just one team, Madam Chair, but several teams to many international competitions and placing very well. Among many other outstanding programs at that school. In fact, one of their outstanding graduates is now my constituency association, or my constituency office assistant in Strathcona Sherwood Park, and I can attest that her education was outstanding. We also have the very first Canadian charter school in Sherwood Park, a New Horizons charter school, which is a school that helps to focus on gifted students who maybe don't succeed very well in traditional learning environments. They have a catered program to help those students reach their fullest potential. That is a school with an outstanding track record, and Sherwood Park and Strathcona County residents are lucky to have that as an option. Furthermore, we have a great Francophone school with École Denis et Claudette Tardif that offers K-6 currently. They would love to go to K-9 or K-12, and they certainly have a lot of demand. And so I've been working closely with them to understand their needs and their challenges. They have great teachers, great administrators, and they're doing a lot to advance Francophone education and the rights of Francophone first language families across the capital region. So in addition to that, we have many, many families using homeschooling options. The point I'm trying to make, Madam Chair, in the short time I have left is choice is important. And there are so many great choices in Strathcona Sherwood Park, and I am pleased to stand up here today in support of that choice to say, parents in Strathcona Sherwood Park, I will stand up for your right to pick the best school for your kids so your kids can reach their fullest potential. And you can count on this government to have your back in enforcing that choice day in and day out. That's what we were sent here to do by Albertans in the election last year, and that is my commitment to you in the years to come. I'm pleased to speak in favor of Bill 15. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak to Bill 15 in Committee of the Whole? If not, the Honourable Member for Calgary Falconridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, I'm very proud that our government has introduced this piece of legislation, and I want to say thank you to the Education Minister for bringing this. One of the big issues in the education is the freedom of choice. And this bill will give the fundamental freedom to parents to choose the type of education they want for their children. This will protect and strengthen the voice within a vibrant and diversified educational system. Through this proposed legislation will affirm that the parents, not the politicians, like the politicians on the other side, that feel that they will be the best for their children. Well, this was our platform commitment right from the beginning, and we're going to honor this. I have experience to go to the charter schools, private school, public schools throughout my life. I can speak about this. And whatever the stories we heard from the other side, they're not true. So when we go and talk to the constituents, we talk to the people who want to send their kids to the faith schools, where their children can get the education at the same time consistent with their religion. We have a Khalsa school in Calgary. We've got Islamic schools. I have taught to the people. What are we going to tell them? They don't have a right to send their kids to those Islamic or Khalsa schools or Jewish school. They have absolute right. We got about 15 charter schools, and there was a cap on this, and 13 schools are performing very well. This previous government didn't allow single charter school. They were using their own political agenda. Those same school trust boards, they were denying those applications. Nobody knew about this. Parents are asking you. 7,700 students go to the charter schools in Calgary. 19,000 students are on the waiting list. What should we tell those 19,000 kids? They don't have a choice? Their parents don't have a choice? These politicians want to decide. I am not willing to let these politicians decide where their children are going to the school. This is not the only one choice, is a charter school. There are religious schools. Some parents want to have a homeschooling. Who are we to decide? And who are they to decide? They have done the last 4 years. And I'm very proud. When I look at my education minister, I feel so proud. This is the choice of education. This is the freedom that parents deserve. You can talk about any act or any amendments. The simple reason is we are not going to let their ideology take the right away from the parents. And I want those members to hear me very clearly and loudly. They have right, and we are so proud to give this right to those parents. I don't know who they talk to. I have talked to my constituents, and people are very happy once they know that there'll be charter schools and they will have a choice. And if they talk to some other people, I'm willing to go and debate, or talk to their constituents too. I'm willing to door knock their ridings too. So we'll go, and I know I'm running out of time, so I won't take too much time, but I just want to put this in a record that I am very proud, and I will never let this members opposite side to block this bill. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Any other members wishing to speak to the bill? I will call the question on Bill 15, the Choice in Education Act. On the clauses of the bill, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. On title and preamble, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. Glenn.
Members, Committee of the Whole has under consideration Bill 16, Victims of Crime Strengthening Public Safety Amendment Act 2020. Any members wanting to speak at this time to Bill 16? Okay, so Amendment A2 is being considered at this time. The member from Edmonton West Henday.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for clarifying that we are indeed on Amendment A2, brought forward by the member from Calgary Mountain View, and it's a very reasonable amendment. I think that I've had the opportunity a few times to share my concerns with Bill 16, which there are many, but in this particular case, I just want to focus on the amendment before us. Now, I think it's important to recognize that this amendment will restore the financial benefits for victims that this government is trying to take away from those victims. It is needed because the current Bill 16 that is before us takes away the ability for financial benefits to those victims. Now, this amendment will ensure that if a victim of crime is paralyzed or has massive psychological trauma, that there are other supports in place for these people. And if a victim has experienced a crime that has traumatic, physical, or psychological impacts, it is the duty of the government to protect them, which is not being done in the current bill as put forward by the Minister of Justice. Now, what we're seeing here is an attempt to underfund these programs and undercut the funding that is earmarked for these survivors and for these victims, and that is very concerning to all of my colleagues here in the NDP caucus. It is incredibly important because the bill as it currently is drafted will only allow for benefits for a severe neurological injury. And this is not the only way that a victim can be impacted for the rest of their life. There are current consultations under the existing legislation, and the proposed government changes definitely constrains the current recommendations from that committee and would require for the redoing of the legislation all over again. And I question why we wouldn't do it right in the first place when we have the opportunity, and instead this government is going to end up coming back to this House with more amendments to this legislation because they didn't get it right. It is crucial for the government to continue to protect victims of crime, and this amendment will make sure that happens. I would also point out that this amendment will ensure that if a minor is a victim but doesn't become aware that a crime was committed until later in life, that they will still have the opportunity to apply for benefits, or if, as a minor, they were unable to report the crime, they will have opportunities to do so later. This is a vital amendment to ensure that all victims of crime will have the support that they may need. And once again, I would thank the member from Calgary Mountain View for bringing forward this important amendment, and I hope all members will support it to try and at least make Bill 16 and the massive holes that we're seeing in it a little better. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. On Amendment A2, are there any further speakers? Recognize the member from Calgary East.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand to provide my opposition to the proposed amendment to Bill 16 and to provide my support and voice my thoughts about this bill, the Victims of Crime Strengthening Public Safety Amendment Act 2020. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation to the Minister for introducing Bill 16 and for taking the lead to make sure victims affected by crime are supported and protected while public safety is maintained. Also, I commend the Minister for taking time for hearing the concerns of rural Albertans on this matter. As mentioned by the Minister, this bill would expand the Victim of Crime Fund to include public safety initiatives as part of deterring crime and preventing victimization. It will as well increase victim surcharge applied to provincial fines from 15% to 20%, making the fund from $40 million to about $60 million, and to provide more funding in delivering services which would increase policing capacity, additional Crown prosecutors, and drug treatment courts. Mr. Chair, the Victims of Crime and Public Safety Fund will be used to make necessary grants related to programs that benefit and promote public safety in the surrounding communities, and it will ensure criminals are off the street. In this regard, it will support Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team, or ALET, Rural Alberta Provincial Integrated Defence Force, or the RAPID, and other organizations established to combat crimes in Alberta. As we understand, the current legislation does not address public safety. These amendments will allow us to not only better understand the cycles of victimization, but to implement initiatives that deter crime and promote public protection. According to the City of Calgary community crime data, there has been a huge increase in the number of crimes that were reported. In the year 2017, the number of crimes was about 34,200 cases, and just last year, 2019, 38,000 cases were reported. Mr. Chair, in the Calgary East constituency, many families, friends, and communities have been affected by increasing amount of crimes. And based on the 2019 Calgary Community and Disorder Stats, the communities in my riding had reported about 8,900 cases. It is disheartening to see thousands of families and individuals struggle and frustrated to seek assistance and support from the government. This is very concerning for the communities, and I would love to see the support of all members in protecting and supporting the families and the communities that are faced with victimization. The leaders of the community association have voiced their concerns to me in regards to the increased criminal activities such as break-ins, theft, and robberies. Mr. Chair, also they have observed that many of these criminal activities are organized and have been executed by groups of individuals participating in these untoward incidents. As such, it is important that communities and appropriate authorities collaborate together to maintain safety and support all communities. This will allow the members of the community to work closely together to ensure crimes are being brought to justice. With the additional support from the appropriate authorities, it will strengthen the safety of the communities to further prevent victimization. Having said that, Mr. Chair, let me just speak about the initiatives that have been taken by one of the community association in my riding. The Arenoots Community Association hosted a town hall September last year to bring together the Calgary Police, 12 CSI residents and businesses to find ways and collaborate to deal with the crimes and social disorders in the community and neighboring areas. Initiatives have been taken by the Community Association to support victims affected by crimes and to strengthen the public safety and security within the community, one of which they call it the Catwalk. Mr. Chair, the Catwalk aims to provide protection and information to residents in the community. Members of the association walk around and spread awareness to the community about criminal prevention and deterrence. Also, if unusual activities are observed, the appropriate authorities are contacted to ensure the safety for everyone. Mr. Chair, our government has said many times over and over again that we will do everything we can to protect Albertans, keep the communities safe, and prevent Albertans from being victimized. This legislation will allow us to further expand and develop strategies with communities, stakeholders, and authorities to promote public safety and strengthen community relations. Mr. Chair, as you can see, the increased amount of criminal activity is a concerning issue, not only in Calgary's constituency, but to all Albertans. In such a great province, especially in times like today, no Albertan should feel that their safety is compromised. If this bill is passed, there will be an opportunity to see a decrease in the number of crimes in the communities while continuing to ensure victims are supported by their government. As we know, over the years, Albertans have been greatly frustrated with the justice system, as many concerns were voiced with the increasing amount of the crime rates and the difficulty to access to the programs and services that support the victims. Mr. Chair, this bill will ensure the appropriate tools and resources are provided by establishing an interim victim assistance and compensation program in a manner that the existing program does not provide. It is important to provide victims with the timely support they need and assure that the criminals will be brought to justice. Mr. Chair, this legislation will ensure victims of crime have been helped they need when they need it, and it will give victims of crime access to more support and services they currently do not have. More support includes more resources that will combat the serious crimes in neighboring communities. It will not only help fill the gaps, but also build a trusting relationship with authorities that are here to protect the safety of communities. While new program is developed, focusing and supporting and protecting the victims are important and beneficial for the communities who are most affected. The interim victims assistance and compensation program will also support and allow victims to seek assistance in court, counseling services, and out-of-pocket expenses resulting from violent crimes. This investment will better support victims and families that are long overdue and in need for the immediate assistance. Mr. Chair, our communities and Albertans have waited far too long for the previous government to action. It is finally time to amend and legislate laws that will help Albertans get the full care and assistance they deserve. These additions will help communities and families cope with the trauma and further strengthen the promotion of public safety. Let me just conclude by saying public safety is our priority. We want Albertans in all communities to feel safe, and I hope this amendment to the Victims of Crime Act are seriously taken into consideration. It's all about providing better and more services and ensuring public safety and protection, as we have the duty and obligation to maintain law and order, which the previous government did not act on. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for listening to the community concerns on crime rates and for helping communities to ensure the safety of Albertan is our priority. Thank you.
Honourable members, on Amendment A2, are there any further speakers, members that wish to speak? Seeing none, on Amendment A2 as proposed by the member from Calgary Mountain View, are you agreed? Opposed? That amendment is defeated. Honourable members, we now move back onto the main bill, Bill 16, Victims of Crime, Strengthening Public Safety Amendment Act 2020. Anyone wishing to speak? A member from Edmonton West. Southwest.
Just
south. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
We'll find it eventually. But no, it's my pleasure to rise tonight to speak to Bill 16, the Victims of Crime Strengthening Public Safety Amendment Act 2020. I'll try to be brief here tonight, but I do indeed have an amendment I'd like to move, so I will hand that over to our LASS here and await until the original gets to the table.
Referred to as Amendment A3. Member from Edmonton South, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm moving on behalf of my colleague from Edmonton Mountain View, the member from Mountain View, to move that Bill 16, Victims of Crime Strengthening Public Safety Amendment Act 2020 be amended as follows. A, in Section 10 in the proposed Section 12, sub 1 or sub I, by striking out subsection 1A and substituting the following. A, eligible for financial benefits in accordance with the regulations if I, the injury to the victim was a direct result of an act or omission that occurred in Alberta and that is one of the offences under the criminal code specified in the regulations, or 2, the injury to the victim, if the victim is a minor, consists of witnessing the death of another victim or domestic violence committed against another victim as a result of the commission of one of the offences under the criminal code specified in the regulations. And
I didn't catch it, but the amendment is
2 pages, yes.
Written in a way that being proposed by the member from Calgary Mountain View?
Yes, so on behalf of, yes.
On behalf. Okay.
For sure. Yes, thank you. It is in subsection 2 by adding the following immediately after clause A. A sub 1, in the case of a victim described in subsection 1A sub 2, financial benefits for the purpose of receiving counseling services. B, in section 11, by striking out the proposed section 12.2 sub 1 and substituting the following. Application for benefit 12.2 sub 1, an application will be made under section 12. A, only in respect to financial benefits referred to in section 12 sub 2, 8.1, or a supplemental benefit referred to in section 12, subsection 2, subsection B, and B, only if the offence was reported to a police service within a reasonable period of time after the offence occurred. C, by striking out section 13A and substituting the following. A, in subsection 1, by striking out on receipt of an application for financial benefits and substituting on receipt of an application under section 12.2 in respect of financial benefits or a supplemental benefit. D, in section 14 in the proposed section 13.1, I, in subsection 2C, by adding or to determine the amount of that benefit. Immediately after, whether a person is eligible for a benefit under this act. 2, in subsection 3, by adding or to determine the amount of that benefit. Immediately after, whether a person is eligible for a benefit under this act. E, in section 21B in the proposed section 17I, by striking out supplemental wherever it occurs. So, Mr. Chair, it is a fairly technical amendment, but I think it is a very important one. And as we can see, it's a not short amendment. It has a bit of length to it. But I think it's important because this proposed amendment will create specific avenues for minors to access financial assistance and benefits. And particularly, it expands the definition of who is a victim under the Act. And it includes minors that have witnessed particular acts of violence. So I think it's important because when we look at the Act, the amendment to the Act that's originally written before this amendment, it's concerning because we can see that, for example, somebody who has witnessed a crime, a child of perhaps a victim, would not currently receive assistance and would not be eligible to receive things like special counseling or financial benefits. And I think that we can all agree here in this place that if you've had something like that happen to your family, have had something happen like that in your household, or have experienced the impact of a major crime, that you should be eligible for some of this assistance, whether it's a counseling assistance or other direct financial benefits. So I think by including a section on victims that have suffered an injury, we are reinstating the current eligibility requirements for financial aid for victims of crime. And the proposed amendment will recenter the bill's original purpose of assisting victims of crime that have suffered an injury that is through the Criminal Code of Canada, right? So when we're talking about the criminal acts, these substantial crimes that are in the Criminal Code, we want to basically bring back the eligibility or expand the eligibility, as it were, for financial benefits to minors. Right? Because if a minor observes, let's say, and heaven forbid, a murder of a family member or somebody else, we think that those minors should be eligible for benefits. We think that those minors will likely have long-term effects to things like their mental health, will likely have long-term effects to things like their ability to continue in their day-to-day lives, and we think that they deserve to have assistance through the Victims of Crime Fund. And I believe it's my understanding that the Victims of Crime Fund is intended to provide those services, right? It funds organizations to provide things like counseling services. It directly funds some counseling services for victims. And we want to make it very clear that we include in this act, that we include the definition of victim to be somebody who, and in this case, a minor, who has witnessed these crimes. And I think that's a very reasonable perspective. I think it's common sense that we would accept this. It's common sense that we would think that people who are going to be on the receiving end of these detrimental effects for extended periods of time should be eligible for financial benefits and counseling benefits and other types of benefits. And we want to ensure that the justice system and financial aid is not limited to victims of crime due to reporting timeframes, right? So I'm also proposing, and my colleague is also proposing, that this amendment will strike out the proposed period of time in reporting to law enforcement after an incident to reinstate the flexible, reasonable period of time that was previously in the Act before the government introduced this bill. I think that's important because when we look at wording like a reasonable period of time to allow victims of crime, we can see that every single person will react differently to crimes that are committed, right? Every single person, if they experience a crime or witness a crime, they will react differently and they will respond differently to the scenarios, right? And I think it's important that when we recognize that this is crucial, and particularly, for example, in sexual violence survivors and minors who have experienced or witnessed sexual violence or other crimes, that they are able to access the assistance and they are able to report these incidents to police at their own time, right? When they are ready, and we are not forcing these victims to come forward before they're ready. We're not limiting the ability of these victims to access the services of the Victims of Crime Fund without unduly harming their mental health if they simply wait too long. Right? If it takes them longer, if it takes an individual longer to understand the impacts and to come to terms with the impacts and to go seek something like police assistance or other assistance, then we shouldn't be unduly punishing these people. We shouldn't be restricting their access to the Victims of Crime Fund. So I think it's very reasonable. I think it's something that's common sense, and I think it's something that would ensure that the rights of every single victim is protected. And I think we need to acknowledge that when people, particularly minors, are faced with significant crimes, there are going to be many barriers, right? And I think it's unreasonable. I think that it's unreasonable that without this amendment, as the bill is currently written, that the government is actually basically expecting minors to potentially take on the cost of a legal battle to recover some of these costs, right? To go to court and try to recover some of the costs that they may have associated with things like counseling and other disbursements. And I think that is an unreasonable burden to try and place on these victims, and it's an unreasonable burden that will hamper the ability of some of these victims to recover on their own time. So I think restoring the previous language around a reasonable period of time allows us to balance that and allows us to understand that. So I think basically in conclusion, this amendment is focused on making sure that the benefits for minors who witness the death or some other domestic violence occurring, it will allow them to both report this incident at their own time, at their own speed, and allow for them to have a safe healing environment while also allowing them to access this fund. So I really encourage all of my colleagues here to accept this amendment. I think it is an important amendment, and I think it will help many people. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. Honourable members, on Amendment A3, are there any other speakers willing to or wishing to speak at this time? If not, on Amendment A3 as proposed by the member from Edmonton South on behalf of the member from Calgary Mountain View, are you agreed? Agreed. Opposed? Opposed. That amendment is defeated. We are now back on the main bill, Bill 16. Are you ready for the question on Bill 16? Victims of Crime Strengthening Public Safety Amendment Act 2020. Agreed? Agreed. Opposed? Carried. On the title and preamble, are you agreed? Agreed. Opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Agreed. Opposed? Carried.
You ready? Yeah, 17.
Bill 17 on Amendment A5. Are there any members wishing to speak to Amendment A5 on Bill 17? I will call the question. On Amendment A5 as moved by the Honourable Member for Calgary McCall on behalf of the Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning, all those in favour please say aye. Aye. Any opposed please say no. That amendment appears to be defeated. We're back on the main bill, Bill 17. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to Bill 17. I have had an opportunity to speak to it a couple of times and presented my concerns around the very limited response to the judicial order that Bill 17 represents, and also have had an opportunity to speak to the fact that there is a great deal of work to be done to try to decriminalize mental health and to work on more restorative and supportive of family measures that are restorative and supportive of families in mental health, and my disappointment that this bill doesn't approach either of those. So I again come with a amendment to suggest to improve this bill as best we can. 2 pages.
This will be known as Amendment A6. Honourable Member, please proceed.
Thank you. This amendment to Bill 17 of the Mental Health Amendment Act 2020 reads, Ms. Sweet, to move that Bill 17 Mental Health Amendment Act 2020 be amended as follows. A, in Section 12 by striking out Clause B and substituting the following. B, in subsection 2. 1, in clauses B and D by striking out physicians and substituting qualified health professionals. 2, by striking out and at the end clause G. 3, by striking out clause H and substituting the following. Be signed by the issuing qualified health professionals. And 4, by adding the following immediately after clause H. 1, to be provided to the person that is subject to the order, and unless the person has reasonable grounds to object, to the person's nearest relative or person referred to in Section 28.1. B, in Section 22, by striking out Clause B and substituting the following. B, in subsection 1.1. 1, by striking out person designated in accordance with the regulations and substituting qualified health professional. And 2, in Clause B, by adding subject to Section 9.1, brackets 2, brackets 1, immediately before shall give the written statement. So we'd just like to take a moment to talk a little bit about the importance of making some modifications in this this bill so that it is better suited to support and enhance the mental well-being of citizens in the province of Alberta. The particular focus of this particular amendment, amongst the many that we have submitted and will continue to be submitting on Bill 17, begins with a desire to broaden the appropriate people who are involved in the process from physicians to qualified health professionals. And I think this is very important because while physicians are certainly important and integral to the work that's being done in mental health, they are not the only profession that has intimate knowledge of and appropriate training in dealing with mental health. I know that in my own profession in social work that there are a significant number of people who are involved in the profession who have dedicated their lives to working in the area of mental health, and are often the people who are actually on the front line, who are called into circumstances to deal with the crisis level that occurs occasionally in terms of people's mental well-being. And therefore would be appropriate to expand the people who are involved in the issuing of certificates from physicians to qualified health professionals. I know that right now there is a significant push to have the police service, for example, work more closely with social workers when they're going out on cases of mental health review. And they've been very successful in other areas. I know in my practice, the CART team, the Child Abuse Response Team, is social workers and police officers. And I know that the Elder Abuse Response Team, or the Elderly Adults Resource Service, EARS, run through Catholic Social Services, is also police officers and social workers. So if we're putting social workers on the front line and putting them out into the community, then I think we should be appropriately including them into the bill. And of course, this wouldn't be just limited to physicians and social workers. We're asking for all qualified health professionals to be included. I think I'll leave it at that. I think the rest of it is fairly clear in terms of what is being asked. And I think in many ways it's just small ways to improve the bill and to help to move us in a good direction. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak to Amendment A6? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A6 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford on behalf of the Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. The amendment appears to be defeated. We're back on the main bill. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the chance to once again attempt to try to improve this bill before it goes through. It's a shame that so little time and energy has been taken by the government to actually craft a good detailed. Yes?
Interrupt you. Before you introduce another amendment, I will just caution you on the use of names in the chamber.
I don't know what I said, but I apologize and withdraw. Thank you.
You didn't say it.
It's okay.
You'll be fine.
I certainly will watch what I say. So the next amendment that I have, I'll just introduce it to the chair first.
Well, members, this is another two-pager. This will be known as Amendment A7. Honourable Member, please proceed.
Thank you very much. This notice of amendment for Bill 17, the Mental Health Amendment Act 2020, reads as such. Ms. Sweet, to move that Bill 7... Is that what I said?
That's the name part.
I'm just reading the amendment. I'm sorry. Should it say the member from Edmonton Manning? Yes. Ah, yeah. Okay. Thank you. The member from Edmonton Manning to move that Bill 17, Mental Health Amendment Act 2020, be amended. A in Section 3 in the proposed Section 2, 1 by striking out "and" at the end of the clause C, 2 by adding "and" at the end of the clause D, and 3 by adding the following immediately after clause D. E would not voluntarily consent to be admitted to a facility. B in Section 6B in the proposed Section 6D, 1 by striking out "and" at the end of subclause 3, 2 by adding "and" at the end of the subclause 4, and 3 by adding the following immediately after subclause 4. 5 would not voluntarily consent to be admitted to a facility. C in Section 8 in the proposed Section 8.1, 1 by striking out "and" at the end of clause C, 2 by adding "and" at the end of clause D, and 3 by adding the following immediately after clause D. E would not voluntarily consent to be admitted to a facility. D in Section 10B in the proposed Section 9D, 1 by striking out "and" at the end of subclause 3, 2 by adding "and" at the end of subclause 4, and 3 by adding the following immediately after subclause 4. 5 would not voluntarily consent to be admitted to a facility. I think that while this is a lengthy addition, you can see it's all doing exactly the same thing, just adding in each appropriate section of the bill the appropriate concern that we are addressing, that these certificates should be issued when under certain circumstances. In this case, we were adding that the phrase "would not voluntarily consent to be admitted to a facility" as a way of defining specifically the issue at hand and to ensure that the rights of the individual involved are appropriately addressed, as was requested by the justice in the JH versus AHS decision. Thank you.
Any members wishing to speak to Amendment A7? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A7 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford on behalf of the Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. The amendment has been defeated. We're back on the main bill, Bill 17. Any members wishing to speak to the bill? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, thanks, to Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to Bill 17, the Mental Health Amendment Act. I don't feel like I have had the opportunity thus far, and so better late than never, I guess. We do certainly, you can see a pattern of some concerns that we do have around this legislation, the how inclusive and how all-encompassing it should be, but missing some I think important pieces. And so I in fact have an amendment that I would like to humbly suggest we consider here tonight.
This will be known as Amendment A8. Please proceed.
Okay. So the Honourable Member from Edmonton Manning would move that Bill 17, the Mental Health Amendment Act 2020, be amended in the Section 22 by adding the following immediately after Clause B. So that's by adding the following after subsection 1.1. And in addition to the duties described in subsections 1 and 1.1, a patient must be informed, A, by the board if an admission certificate or renewal certificate has been issued with respect to that patient, and the consequences of if another admission certificate or renewal certificate, as the case may be, is issued with respect to that patient, and B, by a person designated in accordance to with the regulations if a qualified health professional is of the opinion that a patient meets the criteria under Section 9.1 for the issuance of a community treatment order under Section 9.3 for the renewal of a community treatment order, and the consequences if another qualified health professional finds that the relevant criteria has been met in respect to that patient. And so, again, I know that this legislation is a response to an issue that had emerged a number of years ago, and there was clear, I think, suggestions from the court's decision that needed to take place in legislation and in regulation to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again, right? And so those were, I think there's like 4 or 5 different recommendations from the court, and 6 actually. And so those were not all being met by this legislation. And so, we're trying to help out here, quite frankly, right? Because otherwise, it'll just end up going back to another case, and we will be behind the what we're meant to be doing in terms of responsibility, right? And so this whole idea of having an admission certificate or a double check on how those admission certificates are brought forward and verified and double-checked by another health professional and so forth. These are all just fail-safe methods by which we can make sure that we're meeting the requirement of the judgment that was brought down with this case, and meeting the requirements for future needs as well. So, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say, Madam Chair. And I believe that this amendment helps to make sure that we are doing this properly. Thank you.
Just clarify that you're moving the amendment on behalf of the member for Edmonton Manning. Are there any other members wishing to speak to Amendment A8? I will call the question on Amendment A8 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest on behalf of the Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. The amendment has been defeated. We are back on the main bill, Bill 17, in Committee of the Whole. Any other members wishing to speak? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, if you don't succeed, right, try again, right, Madam Chair? And that's unfortunate, but certainly we know that we have to make sure that this legislation is correct. And there's lots of different specific, like I said before, that the court was ordering 6 different areas to be changed. And, we have to make sure we do it right, because otherwise you end up having to do it again. And so the next amendment I would like to pass forward to the table for consideration. And once it hits the table, we will start. Thank you.
Honourable members, this will be known as Amendment A9. Honourable member, just clarify you're moving this on behalf of another member. Please proceed.
Yeah, on behalf of the Honourable Member from Edmonton Manning. It was moving that Bill 17, Mental Health Amendment Act 2020, be amended in Section 39 in the proposed Section 45 1.1. And in this case, striking out as soon as practicable, after, and substituting within 7 days of, and the section of Clause B, striking out may provide, and otherwise saying shall provide. And so providing this this amendment is a very practical one to provide stronger language and to compel the governing institution to move with speed and within a certain time frame, right? Within 7 days, laying it out pretty clearly, rather than just saying when it's practically possible to do so, but giving a more definite time frame. And then again, moving from may to shall, or sorry, shall to may, I should say. Again, that compels the governing body and to act. And so I think, again, this is a good practical amendment that I believe that improves the bill considerably, and I hope that it might be considered and here this evening. Thank you.
Any members wishing to speak to Amendment A9? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A9 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest on behalf of the Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. The amendment has been defeated. Any other members wishing to speak to Bill 17 in Committee of the Whole? The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honor to rise this evening to speak to Bill 17 and also move an amendment on behalf of the member from Edmonton Manning. So I have my copy of that.
This will be known as Amendment A10. Honourable Member, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Once again, the member from Edmonton Manning moves that Bill 17 Mental Health Amendment Act 2020 be amended as follows. A, in Section 17 by adding the following immediately after Clause C. D, by adding the following immediately after subsection 6. 6.1, for greater certainty, the authority of a warrant under subsection 6 includes the authority of a peace officer to convey a person from a secure location to a facility. B, in section 18, by adding the following immediately after clause B, by adding the following immediately after subsection 3. 4, after a person has been assessed and examined at a secure location, a peace officer shall convey that person to a facility for a further assessment and examination if an admission certificate has been issued. And finally, C, by striking out section 19. And so these changes, I believe, once again proposed by the member from Edmonton Manning, is some housekeeping. I think it strengthens the wording of the legislation in terms of the ability and the responsibility of a peace officer to convey a person from a secure location to a facility, as well as further assessments and examinations under that. And so while it is maybe considered a minor amendment, I think that it only goes to strengthen the wording of this legislation. And, I think that it goes along with several other amendments that the member from Edmonton Manning has brought forward to try and strengthen this piece of legislation that definitely needs work. And so I do hope that the Government Caucus will accept this amendment as proposed. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak to Amendment A10? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A10 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday on behalf of the Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed? That is defeated. We are back on the main bill, Bill 17 in Committee of the Whole. Any members wishing to speak? The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday.
Quite done, Madam Chair. I am rising again to propose another amendment brought forward by my colleague, the MLA for Edmonton Manning. Thank you.
Sorry, this is A11. This is A11. Honourable Member, this will be known as Amendment A11. Please proceed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honor to once again move this amendment on behalf of the MLA for Edmonton Manning, and I have listened to the debate that has happened on this legislation so far, and I'm very concerned that the many important proposals that we've brought forward on Bill 17, the Mental Health Amendment Act, have not been accepted by this government. I think that the opposition caucus here in the NDP have raised many concerns that have, for one, not been addressed by the minister, but more importantly, I think that some of the changes that we've proposed would strengthen the bill to a point where it would potentially be upheld in court, because at this point, not that I would necessarily like to speculate, I have concerns that we will be back here in the legislature debating ways to strengthen this legislation in the not so distant future, depending on the outcome of that proceeding. And so once again, just to get back to my amendment here, or the amendment on behalf of MLA for Edmonton Manning, that member moves that Bill 17, the Mental Health Amendment Act 2020, be amended by striking out Section 34 and substituting the following. 34, Section 40 is amended, A, in subsection 1C by striking out psychiatrist or designated physician, and substituting qualified, and B, in subsection 2 by striking out reasonable notice and substituting at least 4 days notice. And so we see some, once again, changes here that will only strengthen the legislation, recognizing that the way that the legislation is written right now, specifically in respect of reasonable notice of an appeal hearing, that I don't personally believe, and I don't think that the member believed that it was strong enough. And so as we see here, it's listed that at least 4 days notice will be given for the appeal process, or be given to the person that's involved in the appeal process. Once again, I have concerns that reasonable notice is not strong enough language in the legislation, Bill 17, that is being proposed by this government. I think that we should have a timeline, and in this case, at least 4 days notice. If this government decides that more notice should be included, whether that comes through regulations, then that's a conversation that we should have. But at this point, reasonable notice, I do not believe is strong enough wording in the proposed legislation. And so, once again, we've seen many amendments, not only this evening defeated, but throughout the week. And I have many concerns about what this government is asking us to vote on without accepting any of our amendments. The fact is, the case that caused the need for the Mental Health Act to be amended is a heartbreaking one, and we need to do everything in our power to make sure that people's civil rights and civil liberties are upheld to the best of our ability. And I don't personally believe that in Bill 17, as proposed by this government, that is the case. And so once again, this amendment would move to strengthen the wording of this legislation, and I hope that all members will support it. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak on Amendment A11? The Honourable Member for Edmonton South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to rise and speak on Amendment A7 that was moved by my honourable colleague from Edmonton West Penday on behalf of 11. Sorry, Madam, I misheard you, and we have been through a number of amendments tonight. I mean, it's been moved on behalf of my honourable colleague here from Edmonton Manning to amend Section 40 by striking out psychiatrist or designated physician and substituting qualified. And I think that's something that is a very reasonable amendment. I think when we come and bring, and of course, as members have seen tonight, we've brought a number of amendments forward, and I moved a couple on behalf of some of my colleagues, and I think most of our members here have moved some on behalf of their colleagues as well tonight. But I think that when we move these amendments, and particularly the ones that are not very technical or not very lengthy, and indeed this one is only a few lines here, Madam Chair, we think that they're simply common sense amendments, right? They're amendments that when you look at and see what the changes are, and we say, well, we want to change reasonable notice to at least 4 days notice, right? We want to do things like improve plain language. We want to do things like ensure that members are and the public would be able to understand what a baseline standard for reasonableness would be, right? Because when you say reasonable notice, it leaves a lot of ambiguity. It leaves a lot of discretion, and it leaves a lot of difficulty for people to make those types of decisions as to what may be considered reasonable. Because reasonable notice, I think, being at least 4 days notice allows us to actually understand and say that people deserve to have some amount of time, right? And that amount of time, if the government doesn't think 4 days is reasonable, I'm sure they have something in mind for what reasonable would be, as they have included that language in the bill here already. So perhaps they would be interested in speaking to what they consider to be reasonable and what they consider reasonable may be if 4 days is not reasonable. And I would look forward to hearing from some of my colleagues on the government side around that as well. And I think that by making sure that in the other section we're amending here, by changing psychiatrist or designated physician and substituting qualified, I think we're also then allowing to have this sort of expanded breadth of who is able to make some of these decisions. And I think that's very valuable because it allows us to ensure the Mental Health Act is as robust as it needs to be, right? It allows us to ensure that the Mental Health Act has the latitude while also being stringent enough to provide the measures to protect our public and to ensure that the public has the tools they need. So I'm looking forward to perhaps hearing from some of my government colleagues on why they would be voting this down or what they may be considering reasonable. I'm looking forward to perhaps hearing some of the ministers here rise and defend their bill and speak to why they would oppose this amendment. But I'll leave it to some of the other members of this place to speak and hear what their thoughts will be as well. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak to Amendment A11? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the amendment that was brought forward on the Mental Health Amendment Act. As again, just to remind everyone that this, had a clear set of parameters outlined in July of 2019 that was ruled by a judge that, in fact, 6 sections of this act are unconstitutional, right? And, gave the government year, 12 months to fix the act. The government, this UCP government, appealed that ruling, and of course, the outcome of that appeal is not coming probably until the fall. And so the Minister, I said for Health, states that this legislation is the right thing to do, but again, just to reiterate, it doesn't actually amend the sections that the judge specifically outlined in the ruling, right? And so the section, the sections that this bill does amend is in number 2 and number 8, but completely misses the section 4, section 7, and some other elements of section 8 as well. And so there was engagement that I can see, but still no report on the outcomes of that engagement, and then ultimately the lack of follow-up to ensure that those 6 sections are honored. And so with all of those things together, Madam Chair, we went back and sharpened our pencils and came up with a series of amendments that tried to fill in those gaps that did exist. I know with the COVID situation that we're not passing out amendments to everyone, so I just got mine here now.
Oh, never mind.
Opening up the orange folder, as the Justice Minister likes to dramatically sort of use as a tool. But we have orange folders too, and inside there's just happy things, happy helping amendments that will help everyone. And this amendment indeed deals with the section 40 section and talks about the psychiatrist or designated physician and is substituting the qualified and striking out reasonable notice and then again putting in 4 days notice. And so again, time is of the essence when someone is being held in a forced confinement situation. We can't dilly-dally, right? We saw, of course, this individual from the case being held for months, right, in a very difficult situation. And, we can't have that happening again. Clearly, it's unconstitutional, it's against the law, and it's against the basic human dignity and best practice of both mental and physical health as well. And so I think that we need to make sure that we don't just fulfill our legal obligations, but we, in fact, are here to fulfill our moral obligation to move with speed and to move with defined time periods for physicians to act when someone is in an emergency situation such as this. And so we know that this bill, as it stands now, revises the admission criteria so only people whose disorder could be improved by treatment can be detained. And we know as well that, patients suffering permanent brain damage like FASD or a stroke could no longer be detained unless they also had a mental disorder that could be treated or reasonably treated as a result. Because, of course, what we saw with this particular case, the court case that precipitated all of this, was that someone ended up being forcibly confined with treatments that weren't necessarily in keeping with what that patient needed, and I can't imagine how difficult that would be. And, we need to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen again. We know to provide better access to care, Bill 17 would allow nurse practitioners to assess, examine, and supervise patients receiving community treatment while maintaining physician oversight where necessary. And, I think that's a good thing, right? We know that nurse practitioners, we need to always look for ways to expand their scope of practice to make sure that they are compensated for that fairly and reasonably as well. But we know that we have a level of expertise that we could more thoroughly utilize in our health system. I think nurse practitioners, it's an evolving area of practice. These individuals are very highly trained and competent in the broadest possible way, and it's good to see that we would utilize them in this particular circumstance. This Bill 17 also is allowing people who are held under the Act to be assessed and examined by video conferencing, which is where appropriate. And again, I think we have to make sure we're very careful around the use and the scope of video conferencing. I know that we are very large geographic area here in the province of Alberta, and so the potential for use of expanded use of video conferencing is fair. But it certainly should not preclude the in-person visit that many people need and require, and would receive a better quality of assessments and with that personal touch of in-person assessment. We know that the idea of allowing initial assessments and exams at more locations to reduce travel and so forth, I think, is the wait time is a fair, practical change. And then, but again, of course, going back to the amendment, right, we want to make sure that time is of the essence so that a person is getting an assessment and getting an evaluation and getting the care that they need within a very reasonable time, right? Setting out the parameters of how many days this must take place, and as I said before, time is of the essence. And so, I think that the global idea around Bill 17 is to try to strengthen patient rights, and the results of that court case, again, were to strengthen patient rights. And we know that, of course, the very first principle that we can apply to strengthen rights of a patient is to make sure that they know, they have full cognizance of what they are being treated for and under what circumstances, and that there's a free and full access to information in the broadest possible way as well. To have timely access to medical records, for example, information about legal counsel, and to have the inclusion of affordable or free legal counsel, if that is applicable to the individual circumstance. Again, it's absolutely paramount, right? Because we are talking about, having someone being confined, right? And so the rights of an individual being confined for medical purposes or what have you still has to make sure we're following the procedures, right? The legal procedures that otherwise we saw were breached in this case that precipitated this whole thing in the first place. Talking about access to the mental health patient advocate, again, absolutely necessary. I think this is a very important way by which we can help an individual, and to make sure that people at every step of the way, to the degree it's possible, to let patients know why they're being detained and what are the legal implications of that. And so, Madam Chair, I think that, again, we have inundated the House this evening with quite a lot of individual amendments on Bill 17. And this last one, talking about timely treatment and movement of what should, procedures, and making sure that we have qualified psychiatrists and physicians attending these sorts of cases, and then that, I believe, is a reasonable step forward. So with that, I urge everyone to consider the amendments in Bill 17. I think that it's the right thing to do, and I'm happy to try to move some minds here this evening in that regard. Thank you.
See, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this amendment and speak to the underlying concerns that brought forward this amendment. And that is that there was a particular court case, JH versus Alberta Health Services, that particularly addressed the concerns from a rights perspective, a constitutional rights perspective, that people who are involuntarily held as a result of Mental Health Act and receiving a mental health certificate, that they, while it may be requiring treatment, and that treatment would be in fact the very best thing, that they also need to have their rights recognized. Now, we absolutely on this side of the House recognize that this is a complex issue because, people with certain types of mental illness actually have aspects of their mental illness which makes it very difficult for them to make decisions for themselves. The mental illness itself actually undermines that capability. And therefore, it is on occasion important that decisions be made on their behalf. And as a result, we wish to ensure that some balance is struck here, and that not only the individual but the families involved in these situations have as much notice as possible about actions that will be taken on behalf of the individual who is the object of a certificate. And so we believe that reasonable notice should be well defined so that people understand what it is that is being requested. And so in this case, we are simply asking that it be defined as at least 4 days' notice so that all the people involved have an opportunity to gather together their resources, the support people that they perhaps need, the legal arguments that are required, and then be prepared to address the concerns in the issuance of a certificate. So with that, I would ask the House to pass this amendment. Thank you.
Are there members wishing to speak to Amendment A11? Seeing none. On Amendment A11 as moved by the Honourable member for Edmonton West Henday, on behalf of the honourable member for Edmonton Manning, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Please say no. The amendment has been defeated. We are back on the main bill, Bill 17. Any other members wishing to speak to Bill 17? Committee of the Whole, you ready for the question on Bill 17, the Mental Health Amendment Act 2020? On the clauses of the bill, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. On title and preamble, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we rise and report Bills 15, Bill 16, and Bill 17.
Having heard the motion to rise and report on Bill 15, 16, and 17, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. We shall now rise and report. The Honourable Member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Committee of the Whole has under consideration certain bills. The committee reports the following bills: Bill 15, Bill 16, Bill 17. Madam Speaker, I wish to table the copies of all amendments considered by Committee of the Whole on this date for the official records of the Assembly.
Does the Assembly concur in the report? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Please say no. So carried. About 1 minute, please. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker, sorry. I believe that if you seek it, you will find consent from the Chamber to go to 1 minute bells for the remainder of the evening.
The motion for unanimous consent to move to 1 minute bells. Is anyone opposed? Please say so now. So granted.
Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 18, Corrections, Alberta Parole Board Amendment Act 2020. Honourable Mr. Schweitzer.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my honour to rise on behalf of the Honourable the Minister of Justice and request leave to move third reading of Bill 18, the Corrections, Alberta Parole Board Amendment Act 2020. Madam Speaker, well, Mr. Speaker, as I see the changes taking place, this is another step forward for platform commitment kept. And again, the United Conservative Party government taking steps to be able to protect Albertans from crime and to be able to stand up and make sure that assert Alberta's independence to be able to protect our own province from criminals. I do encourage all members to support this important piece of legislation.
The Honourable Government House Leader has moved third reading for Bill 18, Corrections, Alberta Parole Board Amendment 2020 on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Justice. Is there anyone else wishing to join in the debate? The Honourable, the member for Edmonton McClung.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm typically a big fan of yours and appreciate your comments and inviting me to speak here tonight. Glad to have an opportunity again to speak on third reading to the Alberta Parole Board Act. And of course, many questions still are outstanding with respect to how this will actually operate and whether the apparently $600,000 that it's going to take to put this parole board in place will actually become worthy of the expenditure. According to some reports, we're looking at about 50 potential parolees who are now annually being paroled under contract through the Parole Board of Canada will be paroled under the new Alberta Parole Board. And in as much as many members of the opposition caucus have brought forward concerns about the appointment to the parole board, the new Alberta Parole Board, and the functioning of that parole board itself, there's some other outstanding questions that I want to bring to light from my observations, and that has to revolve around, Mr. Speaker, the actual operation of the parole versus probation system. Because earlier, of course, in debate, I've spoken about having been a volunteer probation officer in the court intake unit under the Solicitor General's office. And of course, those people on probation were granted probation as a result of a provincial sentence or being given a term of probation after a prison sentence in the provincial jail system, 2 years less a day. And in my research, Mr. Speaker, I found that in fact probation and parole can actually be part of a sentencing regime for the same prisoner in the same crime, and they may actually run potentially concurrently or consecutively. So that is something that I've heard nothing about from the government as to how that might actually work. And I'm concerned that no attention has been paid there. I know that the government, I believe, intends to have probation officers who are currently operating provincially perhaps administer the Alberta parole system, but how in fact that transition is going to take, what training opportunities are going to be, how is that going to be funded, is not something that I've heard anything about, and I don't know if it's been well thought through. So I'm concerned about the source of these new parole officers. Where will they come from? Will we be competing against those individuals who we're training in our educational institutions who might make a choice between the parole system federally and operating provincially? And if indeed we are not willing to pay those individuals an amount that's similar and competitive with the federal parole system, are we attracting the best qualified people? So I've got concerns about that, and I'd like to make it be known that we'll be watching very carefully as to how this operates and how the synchronization of the new system actually works, because the information that I've seen so far doesn't touch upon these subjects, and operationally they're pretty important, because not only are we actually making appointments to a parole board, which has to function, and got concerns about that in and of itself, where we have a quorum of 2 out of 5 members. That's an unusual situation in and of itself, but also the nuts and bolts of the operation of the system of parole, as it will dovetail with the current federal system of parole, and the probation system was also is in operation right now. So there are some serious questions that remain as to how, in fact, the implementation of the new parole system will work in the province, notwithstanding, on top of that, the difficulties that we have seen and earmarked with the potential operation of the parole board in and of itself. So we'll be watching with great interest and very much waiting to point out any inefficiencies or deficiencies that we see. Hopefully this expenditure doesn't end up being simply a grandstanding effort on the part of the province. Thank you.
Honourable members, are there others wishing to join in the debate this evening for third reading? Seeing none, I am prepared to allow the government House Leader to close debate on behalf of the Minister of Justice. Honourable members, having heard the motion as moved by the Honourable Government House Leader on behalf of the Minister of Justice, Solicitor General, for third reading of Bill 18, Corrections, Alberta Parole Board Amendment Act 2020. All those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 18, Corrections, Alberta Parole Board Amendment Act 2020 is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 22, Red Tape Reduction Implementation Act 2020. Adjourned debate, Honourable Mr. McIver.
Honourable members, is there anyone wishing to join in debate of third reading of Bill 22, the Red Tape Reduction Implementation Act?
That we adjourn debate on Bill 22.
Honourable members, having heard the motion on...
We're done. Let him move it. Sorry.
Honourable members, having heard the motion on behalf of the Honourable Government House Leader to adjourn debate, all those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the noes have it. That motion is defeated. We are on Bill 22, third reading of Bill 22, the Red Tape Reduction Act. Is there any members that would like to join in the debate this evening? The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Beverly Clearview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Great to be back in the chamber debating important pieces of legislation. The pros, the cons, amendments, as my colleagues have presented a myriad of amendments on a number of bills this evening, and so it's my honor to speak to Bill 22. Now, Bill 22 is a significant bill. It's definitely an omnibus bill that makes significant number of changes. Now, I'll try to keep my comments fairly brief this evening, Mr. Speaker, but I want to highlight some of the concerns that I do have with this bill. First and foremost, there's changes being proposed in this bill that would remove cabinet approval for various actions. Now, before I get into the specifics on why I feel that's problematic, Mr. Speaker, just for the benefit of members in the chamber who maybe have not held a cabinet position in the past, part of the reason why many decisions are not just left to the individual minister and why they do come before cabinet is to ensure that there's adequate oversight on decisions. Now, we all hope that every minister is going to use their best judgment in every situation and every decision that they make. But of course, we know that there are times when unfortunately there are lapses in judgment or people may make decisions in haste. And so I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that many decisions that do come before cabinet, there is a very good reason for it. And it's not just a tradition that to this day nobody can point back to the reason of why we started it. But I can tell you that when we look at some of the agreements that especially ministers, the Minister of Energy can enter into, when we talk about royalty agreements, when we talk about approval of massive projects that have significant implications, it's critical that various cabinet ministers weigh in on their different points of view. And the reason, really, Mr. Speaker, is that all of the different cabinet ministers, we hope, are looking at different bills or regulations or decisions through the lens of their own departments. And so I can tell you, I can speak from experience, the member for Edmonton-Rutherford would often in cabinet conversations ensure that we are considering Indigenous perspectives because he was the Minister of Indigenous Relations and would ask questions about how much have we consulted with different Indigenous groups on various bills. The Minister of Environment would pose questions regarding have we spoken to various different groups? Are we considering all of the different perspectives, which I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, really points to the purpose of why the Premier has a cabinet. If we didn't want to have these different lenses and different perspectives on decisions, then there's no point in having a cabinet, and the Premier could just run the province as an autocracy and not have to consult with anyone. But we do have members of cabinet that are, it is their duty, a sworn oath, to represent their stakeholders, consult with them, and bring those perspectives forward. So, I think members now understand the point of my first issue with this bill, which is the fact that this bill proposes to remove decisions that used to come to cabinet to just give the minister the ability to make those decisions. And I think that's an oversight. I'm sure the Minister of Red Tape would say, well, we're reducing red tape. Well, you know what? Checks and balances aren't necessarily red tape. That's just good governance, Mr. Speaker. And so my first concern is with that. The next one is repealing the Energy Efficiency Board, which, you know, I'm sure the government will say, well, there was redundancy in the work that they were doing. I would disagree with that. I think that there was and is a role for Energy Efficiency Alberta. I think, you know, we often look to other jurisdictions across the country to see what they're doing for best practices. Alberta will now be the only jurisdiction without an energy efficiency entity, which I think is a shame, Mr. Speaker. You know, I wish that that wasn't going to be the case. I'm hoping, because we are still in second reading, Mr. Speaker, that this is something the government may consider repealing. Maybe they'll accept an amendment from the opposition, or maybe the government will bring forward an amendment and reconsider this decision. There are a significant number of other changes, and you'll have to bear with me, Mr. Speaker. This was a very large piece of legislation. In fact, I think it was several hundred pages, or is, pardon me, I shouldn't speak in the past. But it does make changes to a significant number of bills. I do believe that on the Service Alberta section, that as far as the Business Corporations Act, that it's going to expedite the process for businesses. And I'm actually looking to the Minister of Service Alberta to either nod or shake his head. That is something that I believe we're still looking through, but on the surface anyway, it looks like it's a positive step for businesses. But more details will come as we dive deeper into this bill, Mr. Speaker. As far as it's a good thing, you know, I'm up many hours throughout the night, so I've got lots of time, and I'll keep a copy of this bill right beside the baby's crib, and I will get lots of good quality reading in at different times of the day. I'm looking at the fact that, so Energy Efficiency Alberta, and that's what I had spoken to already, that's getting cut. Now, Energy Efficiency Alberta did a number of incredible things over the past few years. In fact, between 2017 and 2019, and to the Minister of Environment and Parks, I mean, we all love to see economic growth. And so Energy Efficiency Alberta delivered $850 million to various companies and programs that delivered economic growth. And to the minister, every dollar that was invested, there was a return of $3.20. So we have over a 3-to-1 ROI, which anyone in this chamber will recognize that is a very good thing. And the fact that at the same time as boosting economic growth, they were able to cut 5.7 million tons of emissions between 17 and 19. So the fact that we're about to lose this entity is of concern, because it did something that is a mandate of both sides of this House, which is, of course, to encourage job creation, to support our local businesses, and then something which I've yet to see the other side take meaningful action when it comes to addressing climate change. And so it's unfortunate that here is an entity that did very, very good work that is now, if this bill should pass through all 3 readings, that will no longer be the case. Let's see here. I'm trying to move through my notes as quickly as possible. Once again, I will have more to say on this bill in committee, and I believe my colleague, the very astute member for Edmonton Decore, has much to say on this bill, and we'll be bringing forward amendments as we move through committee of the whole. So one thing I do find interesting is when this bill was introduced, I found it fascinating that there are amendments to a variety of different bills, ministers in charge of them. And I don't know if it was a matter of maybe poor briefing on the part of staff for the minister, but it seems, if I recall correctly, that every single question the media asked was directed, the Minister of Red Tape directed his response to the appropriate minister. Now that, well, I guess in some circles maybe that seems okay, but you would think that a minister that is sponsoring a bill would have a few more details about the bill that they are sponsoring. So I'm hoping that, to appeal to the good nature of members across the way, that during Committee of the Whole, when we do propose a number of questions specifically to different ministers, from energy to agriculture to environment and parks to others, that they will be able to respond. I mean, at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we all have a job to do in this chamber. It's our job as the opposition to ask questions, to critique, but also to propose, and we are prepared to do all of the above. So with that, I will say that still working my way through this bill, and that we will highlight the aspects that we agree with, and make it known the ones that we have an issue with, but also to come with proposals and amendments to try to improve this significant piece of legislation. And so with that, I will take my seat.
Standing Order 29-2A is available, and I see the Honourable Government House Leader has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to respond to the Honourable Member's comments. And Mr. Speaker, just let me take a moment on behalf of all the Chamber. I don't know if it's happened here before, but to congratulate him on the recent addition to his family. That's a big deal, Mr. Speaker, for sure. I am happy that he's reading good conservative legislation to that baby at night. I'm sure that it'll go a long way if they're to follow in the father's footsteps, it'll make sure that has a good chance of sitting on the government side of the House when they take over his seat. Anyhow, Mr. Speaker, I do want to quickly just make a couple comments in regards to some of the things that the Honourable Member raised, and I do anticipate that many of my colleagues that have red tape reduction measures inside Bill 22 will probably speak more inside Committee of the Whole as debate takes place on the amendments that the member says are forthcoming. But specifically in regards to the emissions to the EEA, I do want to quickly actually celebrate in front of the House, Mr. Speaker, that is in this bill, because what I want the world to know, Mr. Speaker, in this chamber to know, is that is the final step to be able to destroy the NDP carbon tax inside this province. The Honourable Member refers to the money that would go into the EEA, but what he glosses over when he refers to that is that money came in with a carbon tax. And what that means is, and he didn't mention it at all, that meant that it was on the back of Alberta businesses, on the back of Alberta municipalities, on the back of school boards, on the back of hardworking Alberta families who had to pay thousands of dollars into the NDP carbon tax that went into that organization, and then, Mr. Speaker, was spent on contractors from Ontario to come to our province and install light bulbs, thermostats, and the worst, Mr. Speaker, and I do see them heckling. I know it's frustrating. I know they're angry as they watch their signature policy come to an end, Mr. Speaker, but I'm excited, and my constituents are excited to finally see the end of the NDP carbon tax. But as they hired those contractors in Ontario to install light bulbs, and I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but I'm okay with installing my own light bulbs. I don't need taxpayers to come and buy them. They installed thermostats. And you know what else they installed, Mr. Speaker? They installed shower heads. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? Those shower heads didn't even work inside the rural communities that I represent because they wouldn't work under well water pressure, Mr. Speaker. That's what they did with the money. And at the time, Mr. Speaker, their then leader, or their then premier, the now leader of the official opposition, could not even point to one reduction in emissions in a famous interview at the end of the year around Christmas time, getting ready for the year-end interviews. And when they asked her, can you show what happened with this carbon tax and the work that the EEA did in regards to emissions reductions, Mr. Speaker, she couldn't refer to one number that showed those reductions. So all that happened was they took taxpayer dollars, bought ineffective equipment from Ontario, and put Ontario people to work instead of this province, Mr. Speaker. And what's interesting, Mr. Speaker, is we have something in this province called Emissions Reduction in Alberta that goes all the way back to Environment Minister Ralph Klein, that works with the industry to not take money out of hard-working families' pockets, but instead works with the industry to be able to create technology and innovation that makes our industry the best inside the world, Mr. Speaker. And I'm proud to say that's still there. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? They're on track to reduce over 30 million tons of carbon monoxide, and they're doing it without taxing schools, without taxing municipalities, without taxing hardworking farmers, without taxing families, Mr. Speaker, and they're certainly not taking that money, diverting it to Ontario to buy ineffective shower heads, Mr. Speaker. Instead, they're investing it in our great industry, our world-class industry here, to continue to make it world-class, Mr. Speaker, and at the same time to create new technologies that not only benefit our energy industry, Mr. Speaker, but that we can sell to the world. That's our philosophy, Mr. Speaker. So I encourage everybody in this chamber to vote for this bill, if for nothing else, because it's finally the end of the NDP carbon tax in the province of Alberta.
Honourable members, there's approximately a minute left in Standing Order 29-2A. If anyone would like to add an additional brief question or comment. Seeing none, is there anyone else wishing to speak to second reading of Bill 22, the Red Tape Reduction Implementation Act? Seeing none, I am prepared to call the question. Honourable members, the Associate Minister for Red Tape Reduction has moved Bill 22, Red Tape Reduction Implementation Act 2020. All those in favor of Bill 22 at second reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 22, Red Tape Reduction Implementation Act 2020 is now read a second time. On our government bills and orders for third reading, Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020, Honourable Minister LaGrange.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Okay. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is my honour to rise and move third reading of Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020. Mr. Speaker, Albertans are proud of our province's vibrant and robust education system. Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020, protects the level of choice Albertans have come to expect in their education system. Our government is committed to offering these options so that parents can select the path they feel will best help their children reach their full potential at school. The Choice in Education Act will protect Alberta's successful history and tradition of educational choice. This includes public schools, separate Catholic schools, Francophone schools, charter schools, independent schools, home education, and early childhood education. Mr. Speaker, this legislation does a lot of good things, which I will get to in a moment. But there are a few things it does not do. And I think it's important to clarify these due to the rhetoric that members opposite have raised throughout debate on this important piece of legislation. Despite what the NDP would lead many to believe, this bill is not a money bill, and it does not affect funding for education. Alberta will continue to have a strong and well-funded public education system, one of the best in Canada and in the world. This bill does not include a voucher system. It will not lead to the privatization or erosion of our province's public education system. It does not eliminate our current home education option, and it does not provide an option for homeschooling that isn't already currently available in other provinces like Ontario and British Columbia. Alberta parents will continue to have the ability to choose from a variety of educational types for their children. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's get back to the many positive things that Bill 15 will do. First, I would like to talk about charter schools. The Choice in Education Act will make it easier for those who wish to establish a charter school in our great province where students can learn in programs not offered within our public or separate schools. Bill 15 will make the process for establishing charter schools simpler from an administrative standpoint. That being said, there are still requirements in place that a proposal has to meet to establish a charter school. Charter schools will still have to meet an unmet need in their communities, and there will still have to be a demonstrated demand for them to be established. We are also following through on a commitment we made to Albertans during the election, which is to allow for more vocation-focused programming for charter schools. Now, I want to be clear on this, Mr. Speaker. Despite what the members opposite claim, vocation-based charter schools are not an avenue for streaming. I would like to repeat that point, Mr. Speaker. To ensure clarity for all of my colleagues in the House, I want to repeat that vocation-based charter schools are not an avenue for streaming our students. In fact, allowing for the establishment of vocation-based charter schools honors one of our platform commitments, which was endorsed by the 1 million plus voters who voted the members opposite out of government after only one term. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite know very well that charter schools are required to follow the same program of studies as public, separate, and francophone schools. This means that upon graduation, students attending a vocation-based charter school will complete the same core curriculum as their colleagues attending other schools. Mr. Speaker, this bill also amends the Education Act to recognize that independent schools are an important part of the education system, something the previous government failed to do. We also heard from the home education community that they wanted an option for their home education program that was unsupervised, notification only, and non-funded. Groups such as the Alberta Home Education Association, or AHIA, were supportive during the consultation process. While this is a new option for parents that is very similar to other provinces, we anticipate the majority will continue to home educate their children under the supervised option, because having that oversight allows them to access provincial funding. This option also reduces red tape involved in having to register with a school authority. More details of this option will be determined through the home education regulation. Mr. Speaker, this legislation also reflects the results of the public survey conducted during the winter. We heard loud and clear from the majority of the 50,000 plus respondents that they value choice and are satisfied with the choice offered by the current system. That is why it is necessary that we protect it. We also heard that not all parents are happy with the level of choice, and that many Albertans, including Indigenous peoples, felt that there is room for further improvement. That is why it is necessary that we enhance choice as well. It is clear this legislation will protect the level of choice parents have come to expect and want for their child's education. It acknowledges and respects in legislation that parents, not politicians and government, parents, not politicians and government, know what is best for their children's education. And it keeps another key promise that we made to Albertans during the election. Mr. Speaker, I am asking all members of this House for their support of Bill 15, the Choice in Education Act 2020. Thank you.
Honourable members, the Honourable Minister of Education has moved third reading of Bill 15, the Choice in Education Act 2020. Is there anyone else wishing to join in the debate? The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday, followed by the Honourable Member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rise to Bill 15, the Choice in Education Act. And, I've listened to a majority of the speakers today, well, all the speakers today, and the majority of the conversation that has happened over the time that we've taken to debate this bill. And I appreciate where all members of the House are coming from when they have shared stories about successes in their own communities, whether it be private, charter, francophone, Catholic, or public all important parts of our current system within the province of Alberta, and I would go on to argue that the stories that they've shared and the successes that they've shared go to show, as many members on this side of the House, goes to show that the system at this point overall is working. And I am very concerned about specifically what we're seeing in other parts of the education system under this minister. And so I suppose I will just take a moment, and like I said, I won't take too long, but a moment to speak about a school council meeting that I was at only a few short months ago. And it was right before the COVID-19 pandemic struck, and I imagine that the strain that this pandemic is going to have on families and teachers and the school system across Alberta is going to affect the future of our province, and we need to ensure that the money is in place when it's safe for children and staff and students to return to school. But in that meeting that I took, the school council meeting, and I sat with these students, and the very first thing that came up when I sat there was that many of the administrators and the parents that were there for that school council meeting were very concerned about the cuts to PUF funding. And so we have children and students with disabilities who need supports more than anything right now, especially right now through the pandemic, when they're struggling to potentially access. And I know that with the limited resources that they have, especially under this UCP government, from the cuts that we've seen, that these teachers and assistants are doing their best to support these students. But the fact is, it wasn't long ago that we saw this very minister cut 20,000 positions out of the education system. And I've received countless numbers of emails from these assistants talking about their concern for their children and the students that they taught. And just going back to that school council meeting, you know, the Edmonton Public School Board was there, and they were told point blank that they had no ability to make any changes other than the fact that this school had to make a 9% cut to their funding. And so sitting at this school council meeting and watching these parents and administrators having to decide what school choices they were going to make. This bill is titled, the Choice in Education Act. Well, I'll tell you about the choices that these teachers were being asked to make. They were being asked whether they should cancel the school dance, or whether they should get rid of their librarian, or their gym teacher, or their music program. Those are the choices in education that students and staff and families across the province and in my community are being forced to make. And so while I appreciate that the government was elected on a mandate to expand or strengthen, charter schools, or whatever their reasoning is for bringing forward this legislation, I can appreciate that. We may have differing opinions on some pieces, but at the end of the day, the thing that we should agree on is that we should not be forcing these schools to make the decision whether they're going to lay off their librarian or their music teacher or their gym teacher, because those are the decisions that are being forced upon schools across the province right now. It doesn't matter if you're in an urban center or in a rural community, the supports are lacking. And I would argue potentially even more so in rural communities. And we've heard that from the members in this House. Yep. And so they've spoken so passionately about their belief that this legislation will strengthen the system, but at the same time, while the minister is decimating the positions across this province that support those students and those families across the province, the members of this legislature in the UCP caucus have been virtually silent. And so when we talk about Bill 15 and the choices that are having to be made in education right now, once again, I appreciate that they have a mandate, or they say they have a mandate to move this forward, but maybe they should consider the negative impacts that this education minister is having right across the board. And I hope that's a conversation that they're having at their caucus table. Thank you.
Good job. Honourable members, is there anyone? I apologize to the honourable member for Drayton Valley Devon. I did mention prior to the remarks from the member for West Hedmonton, Henday, that you would be next. So the honourable member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to take long, but I want to say that as I stand to speak to Bill 15 today, some of the pieces of legislation are more important than others. And in my 5 years of being in this legislature, I'm not sure that there's been a more important piece of legislation. Hear, hear. And I want to thank personally the minister for all of the work and the effort that you've done in crafting this piece of legislation. I believe it's an excellent piece of legislation, and I believe it's excellent for a number of reasons. Let me start by naming one. I believe it's an excellent piece of legislation and will have my full support because it recognizes that education starts with the family. It starts with that strong foundation, and it clearly states within the piece of legislation that it understands that the relationship between the parent, the child, and the state is important, but that parents have the prior duty for educating their children. And that is always and should always be the foundation stone for starting to talk about education. So thank you for enshrining that in this piece of legislation in Bill 15. I want to say that I'm very supportive of this bill because it recognizes the 150-year history of educational choice in this country and in this province. If you're going to build a piece of legislation, it should recognize the good work that has gone on before it. And we could start with the BNA Act and its recognition of French Catholic education in this country, and the recognition that this country was made up of both English and French, of Catholic and Protestant. And so we built this piece of legislation on that recognition. It recognizes the Laurier-Greenway Compromise of the 1890s, I believe it was, in Manitoba, where we began, after a long debate and a very raucous debate in Manitoba, that where numbers warrant and where parents desire to have a choice, that there will be an opportunity for parents to have French language and Catholic education in Manitoba, as well as English and Protestant education in Manitoba in the 1890s under the Laurier-Greenway Compromise. It recognizes the foundation stones of this province at the beginning of our province, in our provincial history, where we've had public and separate, but even more importantly, and just as importantly, that we have a system that is funded equitably, not equally, but equitably. That those choices for parents in their education is funded and deserves to be funded.
Hear, hear.
I want to thank you for this piece of legislation, which recognizes and articulates a commitment to educational choice. It doesn't rank educational choice. It doesn't say that one choice is more important than the other. It respects educational choice of the parents. And I want to thank the minister and this government and the people that will vote for, and the legislators that will vote for this piece of legislation, because you understand and you support, by supporting this bill, that educational choice is important, whether it's public, Catholic, separate, francophone, home education, charter, whatever the choice is, that it is worthy of being supported with law in this province.
Hear, hear.
And finally, and my last comment, would be that it keeps a campaign commitment. Often we as MLAs and as politicians are cast with the fact that we often make promises that we don't keep. Well, I'm very proud of the fact that we campaigned on this, on educational choice, and we have kept our promise. Promise made, promise kept.
Hear, hear.
I'm very proud of the fact that at the end of the day, this piece of legislation supports the most unique, I believe, system of education anywhere in the world. One that has a true understanding of educational choice, that it can be implemented, that it can be driven by the desires of the parents and the needs of the student. And this piece of legislation recognizes that, it supports that, it puts legs to it, it funds it. We should be so pleased, and we should be very proud when we pass this bill. This is a good bill. This is a good piece of legislation, and it respects parents, and it works for the best interests of the students. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Here, here.
Honourable members, Standing Order 29-2A is available. Seeing none, is there anyone else wishing to join in the debate this evening for third reading? Honourable members, I'm prepared to call the question or allow the Honourable Minister of Education to close debate should she wish. The Honourable Minister.
I close debate on the bill.
Honourable members, having heard the motion as proposed by the Honourable Minister of Education, she's moved third reading of Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020. Those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed to the motion, please say no. No. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered, and a division has been called. Call in the members. Hey Phil, do you know what they're doing after, or is this it? 1 minute bell. Honourable members, a division has been called on third reading of Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020. All those in favour of the motion for third reading, please rise.
Honourable Mr. Copping, Honourable Mr. Panda, Honourable Mr. Nixon, Honourable Minister LaGrange, Honourable Mr. Glubish, Mr. Turton, Honourable Mr. Nicolaitis, Honourable Ms. Pond, Mr. Ellis, Mr. Rosewell, Ms. Goodridge, Ms. Armstrong-Hominick, Mr. Reid, Ms. Lovely, Mr. Yao, Mr. Horner, Mrs. Allard, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Tour, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Williams, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Smith, Mr. Getson, Mr. Singh.
All those opposed, please rise.
Mr. Billis, Ms. Goring, Mr. Shepherd, Mr. Dang, Mr. Egan, Mr. Dack, Ms. Renault, Member Carson.
Mr. Speaker, total for the motion, 25, total against, 8.
That motion is carried and so ordered.
Bill 15, Choice in Education Act 2020, is now read a third time.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to all members of the Assembly for their hard work this evening. That's a tremendous amount of progress. Let's, with that, say that we will adjourn the chamber till tomorrow at 1:30 p.m.
Members, having heard the motion as proposed by the Honourable Government House Leader to adjourn the House till tomorrow at 1:30, all those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered. The House stands adjourned until 1:30 tomorrow.